We're live.
Yay.
All right.
I'm just trying to monitor in the YouTubes.
Well, howdy there, internet people. Oh, this is the wrong channel. So anybody fan of Beau of the Fifth Column here?
Oh yeah, he's cool.
That's his catchphrase. It's a good one. How's everybody doing today?
Yeah, doing pretty good.
So we've got
Normie.
Doing good.
Sorry. Another awkward intro into the books.
It's live. It's live. So we're going to be going through some stuff today, though. I think we're going to be talking about a topic that we sometimes explored at Psymposia. Occasionally, I think we think about
a core topic.
Psychedelics and capitalism. There was a recent discussion of it.
Let some people get in here first.
Yeah, I know. Face, you're really
right into it.
This is like people coming over your house. You just you start talking. All
right, guys.
Maybe I should open YouTube because I'm not looking at who's in. But
so you can see how many. It
the
says,
little icon.
Yeah,
on
the eye with
left.
the number is. I think
Getting
that's
there.
from everywhere.
I'm not seeing it live on YouTube right now, though.
It's not.
Did you go to our home page?
Yeah, I'm seeing it live on Periscope, which I can't believe is still
working.
There's
two watching now. Okay, there we go. Well, hey.
Two where?
Did you go to our... Oh, God, I hear feedback.
Was that YouTube or?
That was me opening the tab.
It's live on
YouTube is live. There's two people on there. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the clusterfuck that is us figuring out what's going on. And the number clicks down.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, so we've checked our locations. Yeah.
I'm checking one more time.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. There we go.
I see us live, so I think we're good.
Well, I'm still getting the hang of the restream thing.
Gotcha.
And I just want to make sure that the emailer that we sent out has the right link. It doesn't. It's not loading for me unless it's a cache issue.
No, it's probably a cache issue because it's just if you go to the YouTube channel, to our YouTube channel, that is where the live shows up. It's always the same link. It always points to the same place. I'm trying to think of a way to make that funny and failing miserably.
Same McNugget time, same McNugget place. Still not funny. But.
Yeah, no, I think
it's not even on a private browser. It's not working.
So Normie, if you go youtube.com/
I get it. I went there and it was working.
But was that not the link you sent out?
The link in the emailer is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, but if you sent out the wrong link in the email,
I very well may have.
That would be
no amount of clicking here is going to rectify that one. So that's the thing. The link should always be youtube.com / /Psymposia/live. Frankly, even if you just link people to /Psymposia, it'll take them to the homepage and the live will just be playing in that small little video where it's normally the we're controversial thing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, as always,
I think I got the link wrong. I think I messed that up.
Whoops.
Okay.
It's okay.
Because there's people that are in there right now that are waiting, and it doesn't show the video.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh God! Can you make a comment there and direct them?
Yeah, just post there, and then we can start over here.
Well, one way or another,
I gotta figure this out next time.
We've got things to do one way or another, so we'll get there.
It feels like there should be some quip about like the number of options that have been afforded, and never mind. I'm still trying to find some sort of funny in, and
there's no
failing miserably.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks for trying. But let's just dive in, I guess, or do you want to wait for Normie to post?
I just posted it in the other other channel.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
take us away, Nishay.
I don't want to take us away.
You don't want to take us away.
No.
All right. Okay. Well, there was a debate recently, hosted by the Oxford Psychedelic Society, and I think it's great that a psychedelic society is, taking initiative, trying to get some kind of topic that is important. That was psychedelic capitalism. The debate was called Psychedelic Capitalism. It was between Alex Beiner of Rebel Wisdom and Lars Wilde, I believe is the vice president at Compass Pathways. So the topic ostensively was psychedelic capitalism. And, this is a topic that we've spent a lot of time thinking about and writing about at Psymposia.
It's a topic near and dear to our hearts, one might
There you
say.
go.
So since that is the case, we figured we might pop in to that conversation and see what arose and offer some additional commentary.
Yeah. And I mean, for those of you who aren't aware, this sort of debate format is something that we are interested in doing. It's not on this channel, but I was involved in a debate with Adeptus Psychonautica. And way back when, at the early days of the pandemic, Christian Angermeyer actually challenged Psymposia to a debate on Twitter. We accepted, but that hasn't come to pass. So this seems like a good time to talk about psychedelic capitalism. So how do we want to do this? Do we want to just jump into the video clips that we've got?
Yeah, we get all those clips queued up. Let me there we go.
All right. So just a quick sort of global understanding here. We're looking at one of the moderators, Kenneth of the Oxford Psychedelic Society, and occasionally he'll be asking questions. And I think we'll just start with who's on this call, who's on this debate.
Yeah, this is just a quick intro of the different players. And anytime you want me to pause, just let me know. Oh, and I also need to check. I always screw up and restream. Can you guys hear the audio?
Lars Wilde is the President, Chief Business Officer, and co-founder of...
Can you hear that audio?
Yeah.
Compass Pathways, focusing on operations, digital health solutions, and fundraising. He's an active serial entrepreneur in tech and biotech and a business angel investor, and has helped to successfully build several companies. Before joining Compass, Lars was the founder and CEO of Spring Lane, a leading European direct-to-consumer kitchen and barbecue brand, and the largest German cooking magazine. He's also previously worked as an investor at Waterland Private Equity, one of the world's best-performing private equity funds. In the past, he's also spent time with the Boston Consulting Group in Munich and Sao Paulo. Alexander Beiner is co-founder of Rebel Wisdom, a media platform with 250,000 followers and a focus on sense-making and cultural analysis. He's also a co-executive director of Breaking Convention, a psychedelic education charity which hosts Europe's largest conference on psychedelic medicine and culture. It's fantastic.
All right. So you want to just go right into Lars' intro?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
The Compass Pathways is the original brainchild of my two co-founders, Katja and George, who founded the non-profit version of Compass after their son suffered from severe episodes of mental health suffering, and they found help in ketamine and eventually psilocybin, and that got them on the path to figuring out how can we get psilocybin therapy to patients. I have a very similar story. I treated my own generalized anxiety disorder and treatment-resistant depression with psilocybin, which got me into the space. And again, I was also looking into, can we get this to patients like me in an above-the-board way. We joined forces in 2017, started the company with the goal to create a world of mental well-being by driving innovation to patients as quickly as possible in an affordable way. And our core focus is on treatment-resistant depression. That's where we are currently running a phase 2B study in 10 countries with the goal to very quickly progress with hopefully positive results into phase 3 and drive towards approval in 24-25.
So I currently
do you want to pause it?
Why don't we pause?
Breaking Invention.
So it feels worth pointing out that like there's a bunch of questionable assertions that get made in that sort of founding story, right? Like we know, so he throws out the story of George and Katya for Compass, claiming that they got interested in psychedelics because of their son's treatment-resistant depression. But we know for a fact that George and Katya were exploring setting up a psychedelic hospice center and sort of bougie elite spa on the Isle of Man well before they were getting into treatment-resistant depression. So this whole narrative of we're here because our son had this debilitating depression is one that raises a lot of questions. Like when they say that this was their entry point, we know this wasn't their entry point. And so why has this narrative shifted? Why has this become the sort of standard story that gets told now? And also in the case of Lars, right, we know that initially he wasn't he was presenting his familiarity as though it was through a friend. Now he says it's his own experiences. And initially he wasn't listed as a co-founder of Compass on the Compass website, which raises questions of we know that co-founderships are handed out at times as sort of rewards for different participation in a company. So there's just a whole bunch of issues as far as how reliable a narrator he is.
I just want to point out as well that, if we are to take Lars at his word that, he treated his own generalized anxiety and treatment-resistant depression with psilocybin, there was no legal way in which he could do that. So he's admitting to some sort of either, self-treatment without the help of a medical professional or an underground, unstructured practice.
And it does make sense to me. First of all, like just to give the other perspective on why some of those decisions might have been made on his part. Like it does make sense to me to not that some people would. It's very common for people to originally say like, oh, someone I knew was impacted because there is so much stigma still, and the illegality, and definitely like I can understand someone wanting to be a little indirect at first, but then feeling more bold, as time goes on, and then wanting to say, no, this did happen to me. So I can sympathize with that. I can also sympathize with like the idea of I had to do this illegally, for example, but like I want to make it easier for people to not have to do this illegally. If they don't want to, then feel comfortable with that. However, I do find that there's a problem with that when the capitalists try to enclose the situation and try to make it that they're going to now control the access in a way that like they weren't themselves subjected to.
Precisely. Why don't we hear from Alex? Unless Brian, do you have something?
No, I'm good.
Cool.
Nope.
So some people here might have been to Breaking Convention. We're Europe's largest, we host Europe's largest conference on psychedelic medicine and culture. Happens at Greenwich University every 2 years, except with a COVID break, so we're back next year. And as well as that, through Rebel Wisdom, I've been increasingly following the, in fact, the first film I did around this was called The Rise of Psychedelic Capitalism. So trying to speak to many different people in the field, across the field, from clinicians to researchers to activists to economists, to try and make sense of what's going on, this very rapid change in psychedelics. I'm particularly interested in that. I'm particularly interested in the promise, I think like many of us are, the promise that psychedelics hold, but also the risks of this very different phase we're entering. So I feel like I've been in a kind of wrestling with this quite intensely for a year or so. I want to start with...
So let's talk about that. So Alex...
When he said wrestling with this, did he mean the subject? Sorry to interrupt. The subject.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to pause and I think that he means he's been wrestling, because he says he's been in the space, and he has been in the space for some time. He said something like 15 years, but he says that he's been wrestling with, commercialization, capitalism, mainstreaming for the last year. But then again, he said that he was sort of involved with mainstreaming before it was called mainstreaming. So I'm going to guess that whatever wrestling is going on is around this like commodification question. So that's, I would say, pretty new to some of the critiques that, for instance, Dave has been advancing and others.
What do you mean by new?
It's pretty new in terms of like, noticing that there are, problems with the, the rollout, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, I was critiquing questions of like mainstreaming and commodification as like the core point of talks going back to, I think, 2014, and then specifically around like the corporate takeover. I mean, the moment I caught wind of Compass back in 2018, I sort of laid out a bunch of the systemic and structural issues I saw, started putting them out there, had a bunch of people say, oh, we need to wait and see. It's not necessarily going to go like that. So the notion that suddenly somebody's grappling with this in the last year, or that he put out his first film dealing with psychedelic capitalism, in which they didn't really engage with psychedelic capalism in a particularly meaningful way. Sorry, Nishay.
I'm covering lots of points there.
Yeah.
Are you saying that was he claiming that was the first time that anyone was, or is that because
no,
he's talking about himself.
That's his own history. These are just introductions,
Okay, yeah. So yeah, maybe it was related to his like video or like his like documentary, I guess, around that subject. But yeah, we can. I don't know if you want to get into that now. You mentioned this.
Let's. There's going to be a lot of. We have a lot of material to get through. So,
gotcha.
I changed my sound settings. Let me know
if
you can still hear.
Yeah, this is also my cold react because I haven't seen this yet. So I'm going to.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Let me know if you can still hear this.
Oh, this is we get Dave.
No, we can't hear it. We can't hear it.
Nope, can't hear anything.
I'm going to switch stuff up here.
Dave's really doing this live.
Yeah, the week kind of got crazy, and then as I was thinking about trying to cram it in yesterday and fit it, it just didn't happen. Then I was like, you know what? The three of y'all have seen it, and
I've been like completely submersed in prepping the Jordan Peterson video this week, so I actually have,
which I'm totally excited.
Okay, cool. Oh, and there's a heads up. We have a Jordan Peterson response react. We'll be getting into that in a couple weeks with another. Right. Hopefully live, but we'll see.
The Cliff Notes is Jordan Peterson and Roland Griffiths had a little sit down a little while ago, and we're going to talk about it. So,
and also quickly, Sandra on Facebook mentioned cold reacts are awesome, and I do think that there's like a kind of nice aspect to like a mix of some of us have seen and some of us.
Well, it's great to have somebody go through and clip it down so that you're not like running through a whole thing. But
Case, when your students come into class and they haven't read any of the material, you say it's great. Like I love the cold react.
I'll defer that to Nishay. Nishay, how do you feel about that one?
No cold reacts.
Student cold reacts are.
Yeah.
All right. You should be able to hear the audio now. On Restream, there's just a little audio button that I always forget.
What is the current role of for-profit companies in psychedelic therapy, and what should it be?
One of the issues, and I think this is sort of the elephant in the room in many ways, and this is where a lot of the tension has been in the press, is that there is a lot of tension around the tactics and approaches that are traditionally used in pharma being applied to psychedelics. And I'm looking forward to talking to Lars about Compass's role in that, because Compass has been really at the center of that. And my concern is that those approaches won't get us to that innovative multidisciplinary space. Because even if a for-profit, and I also want to put a flag in that it's not necessarily, my argument isn't for-profit or not for-profit. I think both have a place. But even with the best intentions, I think the game of the market will force organizations to come up against multiple double binds and also very difficult incentives that are going to put pressure on the choice of profit over ethics or what to do about competition. But in general, and this is something we talk about on Rebel Wisdom all the time and speak to people about, is that game, our old game that we've been playing so far for the last few hundred years, is no longer working. We're running out of road. And so what does a new game look like? And I think psychedelics, if there's any approach to mental health that could give us an opportunity to play a new game, it's psychedelics. And what that looks like, again, is something I'm hoping that we all figure out together. But what the old game and the game theory behind it generally selects for is a movement towards monopoly. And it might even be that players in the space don't want to move there, but that's what the game does. That's the game pushes us towards that. And so it means we have to pursue aggressive patent strategies, potentially to interfere in some way, to lobby, all the stuff that we see. And so that for me is an issue. For me, psychedelics are sacred. And for many people.
All right. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, let's just talk about the fact that the game that he's referring to has a name, and it's the economic system that we live under, and that's called capitalism. So there's that. And it's a strange way of saying he says something to the effect of that this is not like an anti-capitalist sentiment or statement, and then goes on to describe to sort of paraphrase Chomsky, capital tends to accumulate. This tendency towards monopoly it's a structural feature of capitalism.
Yeah, also, this isn't like a new feature. It's not like we're suddenly running out of road. The starting capital for, say, American capitalism was slavery and genocide. Like, that's how that was accrued. And so this notion that suddenly it's not working, like, it kind of depends who you ask. Like, this system has always functioned for certain groups of people and in certain ways and at the expense of others.
Yeah, and I mean, it's still very much the case. So I mean, and not only that, but we're also speaking in pretty general terms. Like, in what ways is the old game not working, and how does that apply to psychedelics? Now, they do, get into that later. In some ways. In some ways, the ways that they get into it later are why we're doing this video, because I feel like there's a cognitive dissonance that's happening where, things that are directly attributable to, the topic of the discussion, capitalism, are then parceled out and sidestepped and not necessarily attributed or saying that these aren't structural features. These are something else. So,
I mean, to me, a lot, like, to say that the game is no longer working is almost just like this. It reminds me of just like Make America Great Again. Like, at some point,
or
America
support
was
the troops.
Big, great thing. But like, when exactly? Really, my only thought with that is when exactly was it? When exactly was it working? I don't know.
Yeah, or for whom? I mean, and yeah, I think it's one of the reasons why it's so important to talk in specifics. I mean, similarly, like I've put forward the idea that it's not about for-profit or non-profit, but rather like the framework I've suggested is cooperative versus non-cooperative. And to be clear, the reason that I proposed an alternative framework was because we exist within the context of capitalism, right? Like, the notion of a collective of people who run an LLC because it's convenient and actually give back to the community in demonstrable ways, functioning as a co-op, even though their business structure may essentially be a for-profit. Like, I think it's important to make space for that. But at the end of the day, it's really important to talk about the specifics of what people are doing rather than sort of abstract notions of there is a place for both for-profit and non-profit, because I don't know what that means in the abstract.
Mm-hmm. But he's right. The elephant in the room is compass, and there's a number of points that are raised in this debate, and several which are troublingly absent. So we hope to rectify that here. Why don't we? Anybody else got anything, or we want to hop back in the video?
Let's get going.
I think let's hop back.
Okay.
People, they're sacred. And we treat sacred things very differently in our society. We treat human life as sacred, and it's one of the reasons we don't have drug companies charging huge amounts for COVID vaccines, because there's a recognition that some things transcend the profit model.
Real quick, I want to react to that, because transcending the profit model and drug companies not passing on the, to the consumer, the $30 per vaccine per person that it actually costs to, or is charged. This doesn't mean that Moderna or Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson is not making a profit. That's not the case. Profit model has not been transcended in COVID-19.
Additionally, I'm pretty sure that in the US, a number of people have died from lack of access to insulin because they couldn't afford it, because there has been such intense price gouging around that. So again, the notion that human life is so sacred that pharma companies don't charge, or looking at the case of Martin Shkreli and the price gouging that went down there. Yeah, exactly. Like I just don't think that holds when you look at the real evidence.
Read about the hepatitis, like unbelievable people who didn't have health insurance here. I think it's still current. Like they have to go to, I don't know, India, I think, to be able to get
medical tourism. Wouldn't be a thing if people were taken care of, if profit was somehow removed from the medical system. But really, just back to the example. Where COVID-19 vaccinations and there being, access to people, and the companies producing them not having profit. Like internationally speaking, these companies have stonewalled and worked with the World Trade Organization to prevent their IP, their intellectual property, from being violated, so that India and other places with very advanced pharmaceutical capacities could have the technology transfer to actually produce these vaccines. And as an argument in a place that is rapidly moving, aggressively moving into intellectual property, it doesn't hold up. But anyhow, that's my 2 cents.
Now, what is the role of for-profit, or why have we chosen for-profit? Right, I think that's an important one. When I started looking at this, right, my first thought was, okay, I'm going to go to the Netherlands. I'm going to start treatment centers there, and then in the rest of Europe, I'm going to build centers where people are treated, and the ones that do not respond to standard of care can then be referred to the Netherlands, be treated there. That was my idea. Katya and George were looking at, is there a way to do this as a non-profit and drive this forward? And when we met, eventually we sat down and we went through all the options of what we could do. And we said, look, it's the fastest way that we know what we can do best is as a for-profit model. That's what we know how to execute. And in a way, our key KPI in the company is, every 40 seconds, someone on this planet commits suicide. For every person that commits suicide, 20 people try. And we said, look, this is about speed, right? This is what we're going to be measured against. And so how can we get this to patients the fastest? And that is why we set for profit.
So, profitability, speed.
Well, the speed thing, I just had a good conversation with Dave about the whole speed thing. I mean, if talk about speed, decrim is probably the quicker speed at this point. I mean, Compass is still in phase 2B. I don't know how, I think in the absolute best case scenario, there's something for like 2025, maybe around there. I think it's going to be quite a long time.
It will still be for the people who could afford it, like even after
or
that.
the people, then there still needs to be the integration into healthcare and all that. And
whereas though decrim, like you can just like get some mushrooms and like you can just even you don't have to have decriminalization to just go do some mushrooms either. But to act like that's not on the table as a possibility, and that your way is the fastest, most
there's
efficient.
no proof for that. It's there's
the fastest. Proof to the contrary. At this point, the psychedelic medicalizers cannot say that their policy model has brought psychedelics to anybody outside of a clinical trial, whereas
extremely few
decriminalization
people.
has. Yeah.
And to bring it back
That's a
to
fact.
those questions of narratives and how reliable a narrator Lars is, here are notes from a MAPS board meeting in February 2018 when George Goldsmith appeared, and he presented MAPS that Compass had a conundrum. Do we pursue this as for-profit or not for-profit? They consulted and decided the market would support a for-profit. European government will offer tax credits on sale of psilocybin or 16% of the investment in developing the drug. This is to incentivize and boost UK companies. So again, like this isn't about this was the fastest way to get things to patients. This is the market will support a for-profit.
Bear it.
And on top of that, we know that at the ICPR conference in the Netherlands, George Goldsmith basically said, hey, y'all, like we want to help out the community. This is why we're setting up a medical not-for-profit entity. And then 10 days later, they filed Compass as a for-profit. Now, the notion that he didn't know that they were going to do that when he was making this statement to the psychedelic community just doesn't hold up. So again, the narratives of why they're doing it, I think, ought to be scrutinized and are highly suspect.
And thankfully the timeline as well. So I appreciate that, Dave. That's important.
Totally.
But I think that point, I think the point of access, and that for-profit companies are naturally, this is the quickest way that we get access. That goes pretty unexamined. It's not even just the for-profit companies as a way to get access. It's actually above that, a layer above that is medicalization is the quickest way to access. And again, that's not proven. That's a huge assumption at this point.
I mean, as far as I know, the quickest way to access, if we're talking about mushrooms, is to drive to like a jam band show, you know. And I'm telling you, like, I as a person who's been involved in the psychedelic society movement and such, like, I get a lot of individuals asking me personally, like, how do I find mushrooms? And it's like, well, you can go on the internet and like learn how to identify them, or you could like literally just go to one of these concerts where clearly they are set up to do that.
You can also learn how to grow them. It's really easy.
Right.
Well, and then just another point about the scaling and the speed and all of that, I just find it really interesting. You also see this line of thinking in Robin Carhart Harris talking in The Guardian about the way that mental illness is framed as this is just like some plague that is just like happening to befall people, and like, oh no, we need to do something about this plague, without acknowledging how much capitalism is actually contributing to that problem in the first place. And so Alex Guerin and I just published a paper on psychedelic medicalization and the morality of ego dissolution. And in that paper, we talk about the fact that, there's a lot of evidence that both like increasing authoritarian trends politically, mental illness, and, climate change issues in terms of like the way that the environment is treated all those problems are being fueled by capitalism. And to say we need more capitalism, we need more concentration of wealth and inequality to solve this problem that concentration of wealth and inequality are actually causing doesn't hold water, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's a lot more of that. So we'll expand on that point. That excellent point. Thank you, Nishay.
Yeah, I was gonna say something, but let's not get into diatribes. Yeah. All right, here we go.
The issue that most people have is with the American model of capitalism, or the Anglo-Saxon model, in a way. But that's why we've chosen a stakeholder approach. And for us, patients come first, and only then profitability. And you see that in the mission of the company, which is accelerating patient access to evidence-based innovation in mental health. And what we mean by that is that you have two models in pharmaceutical development. You can develop a drug, and you can price it at the top of the market, targeting only a few patients, or you can price it aggressively and try to treat as many patients as possible.
So I just want to say that no, those aren't the only two models. And like, if you look at cost-based pricing or value-based pricing, Like you can charge what it costs you to manufacture something in your R&D plus, a slight margin for profit, or you can figure out what the market will bear and charge that or charge a little bit below that to make it seem like a deal. And again, we already have Compass on the record, discussing at the MAPS board meeting that they're interested in looking at what the market will bear. So the notion that he's popping up and saying, here are our slogans, this is meaningful. I don't know about that.
I mean, and to just say that patients come first and we're supposed to just trust a business person on that without just because they say it.
Did you not hear him read the mission? He read.
I know. It's just like automatic. I don't.
But okay, hang on. To bring it back though, this is the issue with not discussing capitalism, not naming it, not acknowledging or engaging with it. That we don't need to wait and see what Compass does. We have a litany of evidence about how pharmaceutical companies and other corporations function within the logic of capitalism. So I don't understand how this is said with a straight face.
I just want to point out that, he talks about, he's trying to draw lines between what he calls the Anglo-Saxon model of capitalism and says that, we're a company that adheres to stakeholder theory. And so we're considering employees, shareholders, customers, suppliers, creditors, the government and society at large. Like none of this is really and then pairing that with a price it aggressively, make it up in volume kind of thing. This very much sounds like the Walmart of psychedelic therapy. And we have many examples to show how the kinds of inflexible pressures of the market lead to cost cutting and some stakeholders are more equal than others. And go on.
And if they're actually invested in stakeholders, I would hope to see things like encouraging the production of generics, trying to put things in the sort of public domain, like the notion that you wouldn't, if you're about stakeholders and if you're about more than the investors, you would expect to see as wide and open an engagement with sort of IP and psychedelic pharma as possible, which I don't think we've seen from Compass.
I don't know why. I don't know why people are just not questioning having these companies in medicine in the first place. Right. Come on, guys. Why is this level of capitalism in if this medicine is so important? This wasn't the look up Alexander Zaitchik, his writings on the New Republic, and that. This wasn't in acceptable thing, post World War II generations. This was seen as kind of immoral, getting into medicine to profit. But yeah, it's just so accepted. It doesn't even go examined now. It's just, this is the way to do it. We want to scale. We want access. You got to get hundreds of millions of dollars. We don't even question that at this point. Yeah. I mean, plenty of people do. But I don't see that question much within psychedelic spaces whatsoever.
Well, I want to point out.
I've put a link to Zaitchik's articles in the chat.
Psymposia advisory board member Alexander Zaitchik. I wanted to point out though that one of the things that we'd hoped to do was provide a bit of critique, not only to psychedelic capitalism, but the larger system that is worth critiquing.
Well, there's not even really, and there's no such thing as psychedelic capitalism. That's just a way that we can easily refer to it. That's not real.
It's easy. A better term would be the commodification of psychedelics in a legal market, because even the underground production and distribution of psychedelics is under a capitalist mode of production.
It adheres to the same principles. You wouldn't call McDonald's hamburger capitalism. That would sound
no. And I want to say that although that is a funny way to refer to McDonald's, I'm going to put that.
So the Hamburglar is actually engaged in expropriation. Let's be clear.
He's a freedom fighter, obviously. Apparently, we're going back in.
Thought Slime would be proud.
But let me just say that one alternative to capitalism is democratic models. And if we're talking about stakeholders, stakeholders being consumers, producers, employees, an anti-capitalist mode of production is one in which all of those are under democratic control. So is there any discussion or anything perhaps in the mission of Compass about the union that it will be fostered and facilitated of all of the Compass Pathways therapists? I'm going to guess that would be discouraged. And
do you need to unionize AI programs?
Okay, let's get back into the video.
Sorry.
Because while I guess many people on this call have access to psychedelics and to a sitter, most people do not. And if we medicalize psychedelics for people suffering, this will be done initially in a therapeutic context that requires therapeutic oversight. When you see what the underground therapists or the above the ground therapists in the Netherlands are charging, you see that it's a couple thousand per session. Now that means if this treatment would not be reimbursed, there's no way that a large majority of people suffering from mental health disorders would be able to access that. And so that's why we said, look, we need to build this into the company from the very beginning. We built out a commercial team that's working with payer institutions, both in North America and in Europe. And then again, very concretely, what does it mean to be a for-profit entity? It's really an organization that can take in investor money and redistribute it into research. And that's what.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that little twist on it. That's all they do.
Redistribution into research. Being a for-profit entity doesn't only mean this, but just a quick callback. It usually means that you're an autocratic dictatorship. You're, within the organization, you're a hierarchy. But anybody else have other takes on that one?
I think his claims about price and cost don't actually hold up. Like the notion that people who are currently going to say like pseudo medical quote professionals in the underground are paying thousands of dollars. I mean, there's people who do that. Yeah, but there's also folks who go take mushrooms with their friend, or who maybe see therapists who play in the above ground and the underground who don't charge those absurd fees. I'm not denying that those people exist, but to claim that this is somehow the standard pricing model and the way that it needs to be in the context of non-medical or even like underground access or let's say not sanctioned medicalization. And I think it's also worth pointing out that like right now, I don't know what the going price of mushrooms are, for example, but it's certainly not thousands of dollars. And then if you look at how cheap it is to grow like pretty large amounts, the notion that people couldn't secure their own supply and find somebody capable of doing integration work, that doesn't hold up. And I have pretty big questions about people with like real serious mental health conditions taking psychedelics in the first place, whether above ground or below ground. We've already seen cases of abuse in like the most stringent controlled clinical environment. So the notion that somehow that addresses everything. Sorry, Normie. What?
We're going to get into that.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Let's continue.
We're doing, right? We're running the largest psychedelic trial on the planet. We're going to launch a study for several studies in phase 3 that hopefully makes psilocybin as quickly accessible to patients as possible. Hopefully someone in 2024, 2025, with all the insecurities running clinical trials, but that's what we aim for. And then in a way, I can very much relate with what Alexander said, right? I think, there are companies, they need to have strong ethical values. They need to be baked into the company. And I think that's where we are, and that's where our heart sits.
All right. I mean, just on that last point, the ethical thing doesn't really matter whether or not you have that as a company value or not. When shit happens, it gets covered up. Because you can't let that out, especially in this climate that we're in right now. So I don't care how many ethical pledges you've signed, how many documents you have. It doesn't fucking matter. It really doesn't matter. Great. If a company wants to, if their intentions are, good from the beginning, great. But when shit happens, that you throw that out the window as fast as you possibly can. Donors or investors, and that's not even the main concern is any blowback there. The main concern is media blowback, and how that can start avalanching. So, yeah.
I mean, I just want to point out the almost like cliche of a corporate representative defending his brand, talking about the where their corporation's like heart sits. There was a documentary in the early aughts called The Corporation. Still holds up rather well, and it just simply asks a question of corporations are considered legal persons. So if we are to psychoanalyze or diagnose what kind of person a corporation is, it could only be a sociopath or a psychopath. And this is what's absurd about this conversation, is that there's very little pushback against the idea that a company, putting its hand on its heart and saying, "Trust me," should be believed in 2021. Are we children? I think that we know that the reason why people in the psychedelic community are concerned about the logic of commodification being applied to psychedelics is because we all know very well what that is likely to look like. Why don't we just jump back in case?
So I'm wondering, Lars, if you could answer the question of how we honor the spirit of psychedelics when turning into medication, how we ensure that it doesn't just become another pill that you take.
Where we have made a commitment is that we're very agnostic. So we have a mindfulness-based therapy approach to psychedelic therapy, and the therapists are not superimposing their worldview on whatever the patient experiences in our therapy, but whatever the patient experiences.
Pause real quick. If this was not something that was an issue, Matt Johnson of Johns Hopkins would not have had to have written an article for addressing his concerns about patients having worldviews imposed upon them by the practitioner providing psychedelics, their cosmologies, their implicit biases. So I don't see how
it's completely
meaningfully, how this has meaningfully been addressed at all.
No, it hasn't. And just as a note on that too, like even in that case, like Matt sort of missed the whole secular ideologies as well, that it's not just the sort of spiritual baggage you bring in, but none of us are objective, disconnected individuals. We all have our own situations and worldviews, and that gets brought into sort of all of our social relations. I think that's a totally anemic response.
Yeah.
Also, the notion that you need to have the experience you're having has been leveraged by authoritarian psychedelic practitioners in really disturbing ways.
Right.
It's exactly the right experience for that patient, and we work with that and make sure that the patient integrates exactly that perspective. And as you know, it's very difficult to influence the experience, right? It's in that
what
sense,
does that
I don't
mean?
think that.
Yeah.
Hello, suggestibility central. Like what? I'm sorry. What kind of
go
is that?
Well, is it in fact very difficult to influence the psychedelic experience?
I don't.
Why
think so.
why does Burning Man exist if not to influence the psychedelic experience? Why would anybody?
What was that whole MK Ultra thing?
Well, yeah, right.
I mean, the whole point of the therapist room is to influence the
and all the preparation and priming,
the little chalice, the little Alex Gray painting,
the music.
Why set intentions? Why do it?
I don't get
literally the literature on psychedelics and suggestibility is like extensive, and there's
This
so
is
much
a
written
bedrock.
about the importance of set and setting and how influential that is. and how sensitive, in Rich Doyle's words, psychedelics are to initial rhetorical conditions. Like, I'm just not, I just don't understand how you can go from that and say, make a claim like he just made.
I'm gonna rewind that clip.
Yeah, I wish he had elaborated on this, or he had been perhaps challenged in a debate on such a basic factual inaccuracy.
I'm going to rewind that just a couple seconds here.
Patient, and we work with that and make sure that the patient integrates exactly that perspective. And as you know, it's very difficult to influence the experience, right? It's in that sense, I don't think that there's a lot we can do about it. Where we are focusing is really preparing the patients appropriately, that they can be open to the experience, engage with the experience, and then work with them afterwards so that they can integrate that experience in their lives and take it into their everyday normal life.
Lars is positing a psychedelic black box. That's a wonderful, yeah. Sorry, Lars is positing a psychedelic black box where, you have your psychedelic experience, and psychedelic therapists are, preparation, emergency intervention, and integration technicians. But the psychedelic experience is basically it's like brain surgery for your synapses or something.
And it's described in the way with the shooting a rocket into space, where it's like the rocket is going, it's going to go out of orbit, and their ground control who's there to just help remind you of the stuff you prepared and keep an eye on all of this, the machines and everything. But that's not actually, that's just a metaphor. That's not actually true to the experience and how plastic and shifting it is, and influenced it is by various different factors. And sure, there's not a one-to-one, you can't 100% program what someone's going to experience. But to say that you have no control over, or you have no input, no influence, is a absolutely extreme comment to make.
Well, and I actually
think you're, in the face of history.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think your one-to-one comment is dead on. If you look at Ewan Cameron up in Canada, who is an MK Ultra funded psychiatrist, who he was incredibly successful at depatterning, which was the notion of regressing somebody to sort of childhood states, breaking them down, trying to get this sort of infantile response or presentation. But then for his whole psychic driving, where he would try to implant and imprint new messaging and new patterns of behavior through getting them to listen to this messaging over and over and over again, all night long, all day long, things like that. He was incredibly ineffective at that. So you still see the influencing in certain aspects of that, even though he wasn't able to ultimately achieve what he was hoping to. And I think that has bearing on this discussion. Yeah,
basically, I would say it's actually very easy to influence another person's psychedelic experience. You burn some incense, or you play some weird music, or you have a physical intervention, and it can turn somebody. It can send them spiraling. It can bring them down. This is the whole discourse on holding space or ceremony and ritual. It's just a bizarre statement.
It's great that the co-founder of this group is saying that there's
getting basic shit wrong.
Yeah, and in chat, Sandra's pointing out that neuroplasticity in state is an important ethical aspect to consider, and that the responsibility towards the effect one has on another's consciousness in especially vulnerable states is important to consider.
Totally.
So yeah, I mean, this is commonly known stuff.
Well, it's also commonly known stuff in basic therapy. I mean, therapists often say that if you do not yourself have a regulated nervous system, you're not able to help another regulate their nervous system. So this is no drugs whatsoever. But anyhow, let's not belabor the point.
Alex. I think we have to address the fact that, there's been a lot of pushback in the press around Compass's patent strategy. And the main concern, one of them, I think, which would be really good to talk about, is the fact that the patenting a polymorph of psilocybin isn't quite the same as a new chemical entity in many people's minds. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that because of Compass's first mover advantage, and the fact that you have so much money and so much funding, you're able to, I'm not saying this is your intention, but you would be in a position where you could very easily make it very difficult for new players to enter the market. Because if I want to start a psilocybin company, I have to go to a VC now, and they not only do I have to get funding from the VC, but I have to get funding in case you sue me for potentially having your polymorph. And it is incredibly expensive for me to get the experts required to look at polymorph chemistry, which is very, very difficult, requires lots of expensive machinery, lots of experts. So, some lawyers that I've spoken to have compared it to sort of napalming the field and then laying landmines. So making it difficult for people to come after you, basically. And I think that's the main concern. I think it's not so much profit some people are concerned about capitalism. I don't think capitalism is perfect, but I wouldn't consider myself an anti-capitalist. I consider myself an entrepreneur as well. But I think it's around whether other people can play the game too. And that's something I'd really just love to talk about now, because I think it's kind of key to everything else.
So that game has a name, and that game is capitalism. And we are debating psychedelic capitalism. We've got two self-described
entrepreneurs.
So
it's like do anything to not like hit the point, talk all around it all day long, describe all the symptoms, but don't name it.
I'm just so curious, like if the important thing is making sure that everyone can play the game, like how does that square with capitalism just at a baseline? Like if we look at the extraction and exploitation necessary to maintain this system and the way it functions, like it seems that he's already made the case against that seems like an anti-capitalist position.
This is why like in a fucked up way, like I respect Peter Thiel when he like just comes out and tells you everything.
He's so honest.
Yes,
he's just so honest. I want to make a fucking monopoly, and like this is what we want to do.
It's just like we have to pretend that we're not making a monopoly because people, there are these laws, but like that's our goal. It's like he's very transparent about it.
Yeah, just be transparent about it.
We're not trying to gobble up market share and dominate the competition.
Right. And these other guys speak. Oh wait. Sorry,
Dave, you're muted for some reason.
I don't know why you're muted.
Oh,
I wouldn't have spoken over you.
No, Nishay, yeah, you go.
Oh, just they have these little practiced catchphrases that sound really good, and they say, "Oh, we're not doing this, we're not doing that," and meanwhile, you watch what they're doing, and they're absolutely enclosing and monopolizing as much as they're able to.
I want to point to the fact that on Rebel Wisdom, there's a lot of criticism of wokeism, and yet we're seeing Alex performing really a great rendition of woke capitalism right here. Like this is conscious capitalism. This is compassionate capitalism. This is capitalism with a triple bottom line of people, profitability, and what society or environmentally or whatever it is.
Public benefit capitalism.
Win-win.
Yeah, and it's win-win-win. So many words to not describe the basic exploitative structure of capitalism, where you set up a private tyranny and you extract the surplus labor of other people, and then you reinvest that money to lobby and make laws and hire police to defend your private fiefdom. It's gonna provide an anti-capitalist perspective to this discussion.
Yeah, well, and it's also worth pointing out patents are only one aspect of this, right? And patents aren't sort of a standalone thing. So yeah, he's right that if you're going to approach VC, it's not just that you need to secure VC in order to defend from lawsuits. It's that your potential investors are going to be interested in knowing what else is out there. It's possible that even if somebody doesn't have an explicit patent claim on an indication or a compound, if their claim is close enough, that may scare investors off from investing in your company. However, that is not, like I said, it's a standalone. It's not a standalone thing. It's in service to like other sort of monopolistic attempts, right? It's in service to things like trying to set up some degree of vertical integration or corner the market or control the regulators through a variety of different means. Like, because patents give you the ability, as we've talked about before, to enclose part of the commons. And again, none of this, like when I started putting these concerns out in 2018, before Compass had really shown its cards around much of this, like that was just sort of following, this is the way capitalism works. This is what corporations do within capitalism to secure their profits and accrue capital. So here are the actions we should expect, and sure enough, we're seeing them. So the notion that somehow, capitalism isn't the problem and we can constrain this in ways, my question to folks like Beiner would be, where's the evidence? Where's the examples? What sort of historical or fact patterns can you present in order to make that case? Because the burden of evidence is on you to make that case.
Dr. Bronner's, bro. Whole Foods, man.
Dave's face.
Oh, Dr. Bronner's is gonna. Well, we'll see how that all plays out.
Whole Foods. That $2 pandemic bonus that they got changed lives.
I also just want to post this comment from Facebook that says, it's a good thing we're reaching out to noble, hardworking, law-abiding citizens like Matt Gaetz. Hard to type that with a straight face.
Hey, look, at least we credibly know that Matt Gaetz actually likes MDMA, right? I mean, a lot of politicians, you don't really know where they stand on the issues, but Matt Gaetz likes some ecstasy. Thank you for that.
Let's get back into this.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really important question, and I would say that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're doing. We're not napalming the field.
They are.
Maybe I start because I think that's in the interest.
Oh, they really are.
Historically, how did our patent strategy come about? What are we doing? So initially, when we tried to synthesize psilocybin to support the studies, we tried to work with other groups that claimed they had synthesized psilocybin. That turned out not to be true, and so we took it upon ourselves to develop a synthesis for psilocybin, or actually initially work through the existing syntheses. Now, what we learned by doing that is that the existing syntheses are not up to modern day standards. So we weren't able to produce cGMP psilocybin, which is required to run clinical trials. And that's why we first developed a new synthesis. Now, in doing so, we realized that the prior art did not hold the solution on how to manufacture significantly large batch sizes of psilocybin as required by FDA, EMA, and so forth. And so, solving a lot of problems along the way, we protected the synthesis that we had developed, where we spent significant investment on. And then when we eventually decided which of the polymorphs to develop, we found one that we found suitable for our drug product. And when analyzing that, we realized that polymorphic form had not been described in the prior art, in the work that had been done by Sandoz or anyone else.
So I want to say that Lars is a captivating speaker, but like really holding attention here. I mean, like, I guess what I'm saying. Sorry, that fell flat. I don't know why I had to say that, but like, so okay. Here's the thing. Is it's somewhat he's losing us a little bit in the sense that he says, well, the FDA requires this, and so the problem that we're solving is that the FDA requires this, and so that's the big problem that we're solving, and so we're going to patent it because along the way we found this polymorph. But I mean, I think the problem is that these things are illegal in the first place. There's no problem of the supply of psilocybin at all.
There's also
no problem with its purity or its safety. So, go on, Nishay.
Well, we've talked about this a little elsewhere, but usually when different crystalline forms are patented in like the world of medicine, it's because there's some attribute or quality of that form medically that makes a difference. So like the uptake in the body is faster, or there's some medical reason why that specific thing is being patented, but they were not able to articulate what extra benefit their form or their, what they're claiming is theirs is to the world of medicine. So it's just patenting it because they can, in an attempt to have patents.
And they hadn't done the tests to be able to make any claims that it was faster absorption or, what have you. It's also, his narrative is there are so many issues with what he laid out. So early on, and Normie was present for some of this discovery on our end, where, we found out, so this narrative about, we tried to get psilocybin from other groups that said they were producing it, but they were wrong about whether or not they were producing it. It's like there were issues with manufacture because folks got sick. At the point where your chemist is not actively working, it's kind of hard to provide psilocybin to people. And also, it's worth pointing out that if somebody says, hey, we've got psilocybin, we have the ability to produce it, and we're happy to make it available. Also, at the moment, we don't have any for ourselves. There's real questions that come up around the way that this is getting portrayed. And on top of that, it's important to note that before Compass came along, the FDA wasn't requiring GMP psilocybin because nobody was producing a pharmaceutical product. Nobody expected that the work that Johns Hopkins or NYU or Stanford or any of these other university labs, nobody expected that they were going to try to create a pharmaceutical product. They were just sort of doing interesting research for the sake of learning things. When Compass came along, it was quite clear that they were looking at producing a pharmaceutical product. So at that point, the FDA utilized their discretion and said, we're not going to allow research grade psilocybin anymore. We're going to require GMP psilocybin. And as a final point about the issues with his narrative, when he claims that they created this whole new synthesis because the old methods wouldn't scale, my recollection is when Carrie Turnbull challenged their patents, claiming that they were essentially using the Hoffman synthesis, they surrendered all of those patent points. In the end, I think the only patent around their Comp 360 proprietary polymorph was for the production of that polymorph, which is psilocybin plus silicified cellulose, right? So at the end of the day, we don't see that they've developed some sort of novel synthesis. And with regards to this polymorph A in Comp 360, there's questions about whether or not it has been described before. That is to say, if you look at literature from decades ago, it's quite possible that the X-ray crystallography available at the time could only get to such high definition. So thinking about it as decimal points, if the technology of yesteryear could only show something to 2 decimal points, and now today's technology shows it to 5 decimal points, and so you're showing 3 additional decimal points to the right of the old 2, right? You're basically claiming that, this is a new compound, even though functionally it may be the exact same compounds or the exact same polymorph they were looking at in the past. They simply weren't able to look at it in the same high resolution. So so
this is a solution looking for a problem. So I mean, essentially, I've argued previously, and I stand by this, that the difference between a tenth of a gram's worth of psilocybin and 0.2 of a gram's worth of psilocybin. I understand that the dose response curve is exponential, but at a certain point, it's not. The degree of fidelity that is being sought here is no longer relevant therapeutically, experientially. To be able to say, that you have this level, it's just, who does it serve?
One point I wanted to make on
stakeholders, right?
There you go. Yeah. Go on, Brian.
One point I wanted to make on the napalming the field through patent strategy. That's absolutely what they're doing. Shayla Love for Vice covered sort of one aspect of that. We kind of built upon that a little bit. We wrote a piece called Compass Pathways is trying to patent psilocybin for more mental health conditions than you can name. It's not just Comp 360, which is their version of psilocybin. It was actually, that was sort of a fallback. They wanted to basically get everything with regular psilocybin and sort of fall back on COMP360. And
well, psilocybin or an active metabolite,
or an active metabolite as well, yeah. And furthermore, like one of the lawyers, I think in the Vice article, like to think about it, they just put like all the spaghetti into a pot and they threw all of it at the wall, and whatever sticks is, what they'll get. That's sort of their strategy. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that the claims are so unbelievably broad, and it's just like, oh yeah, everybody does that. They're not going to get them. They're not going to get them, but they're trying to get them. Their intention is to get whatever, maybe an inexperienced patent, someone who works for the patent offices, something slips through. And look, there's a reason why groups that have been here for a while are fighting. Like, I think it came out with Carey, how much money he's thrown to fight Compass.
Yeah, millions.
I don't think it's millions.
No?
I thought it was several
hundreds of thousands.
$100,000.
Sorry, my fault.
I thought it was
Carey, what are you doing? Throw some more money at it.
Like, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars because they, under the radar, like maybe not in the published articles, like under the radar, there's like some warfare that's going on here between these different groups. So yeah, to say that they're not napalming, they are, and that's also why Christian Angermeyer is so excited about this, which we're going to get to that point in just a minute.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get back into this here.
Why is that important to us? Because otherwise, we would be spending hundreds of millions to develop psilocybin through clinical trials to come to market. And as soon as the regulatory protection expires, we would have severe competition from generics. The Tevas of this world would come in with hugely efficient operations.
But I thought access was so important.
With psilocybin competing away any profitability with
that was a different question.
Psilocybin.
I mean, if access is so important to you, why wouldn't you want generics? Because it's not about that. It's actually not about the patients. It's not about the access.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, the problem with these narratives is that they fall apart once you have to put them in conversation with each other. Like this is the issue where like you can give a good soundbite or a passable soundbite for any of these questions individually, but when you have to engage with some sort of structural or systemic or more connected rundown of the issues, it all falls apart because it is fundamentally a series of contradictory arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Compass's past claims and patent applications have included things like whether or not the room comprises soft furniture, whether the room is decorated using muted colors, and other things. Why does Compass have a right to patent those things if they've been around in psychedelic therapy for so long?
Yeah, thanks for giving me that that question, because that is something that I absolutely want to put in the public domain. We're not patenting room furnishing, colors, soundtracks. Whatever else falls.
Pretty sure it's in their patent application.
It's literally in the PCT.
So I what?
Doesn't he just say that he's not gonna enforce it?
But why would they file for the patent if they're not gonna enforce it?
That's the thing. You're supposed to believe that.
Okay. Sorry, I was.
PCT applications that also describe set and setting. We believe that in the medicalization, these substances should be delivered safely, and there's a lot of knowledge. But I want to make that public on record here. We're not going to enforce anything related to set and setting.
I'll believe it when I see it.
That's the only.
You believe it when you don't see it. You mean?
Yeah.
Right. But actually, I want to put a flag in that statement because. Remember, we're watching a debate. Our two psychedelic entrepreneurs are supposed to be jousting, challenging each other's positions or at least present really big, different visions of psychedelics. And You make a claim like that. Well, we'll just get back to it.
Christian Angermeyer, who's one of your investors, because I noticed in the chat someone asking about this, and it's something I wanted to kind of raise as well. He wrote in an email that was in Vice, which was kind of leaked. I expect a starting differentiation between solid players in the psychedelic space. And to be honest, I really just see a tie and compass and copycats. Most of these copycats miss one important thing: patents. Many psychedelics companies out there will never be able to bring a product to market, as they will hit the patents of Compass and Atai. So, I mean, I think within the context of us talking about what can and can't be patented, I just wonder about your thoughts on that. Like, what does hitting the patents mean? What is he referring to? What do you understand by that?
I don't know what he means by that, because he's simply an investor. We're a public company.
I don't know. No idea what the fuck the guy's saying. I got no clue.
It seemed like he was pretty clear, but
I mean, it's very clear.
This is really hard to believe. We'll let him finish.
Yeah.
Hang on.
What's he referring to? What do you understand by that?
I don't know what he means by that, because he's simply an investor. We're a public company, so he has zero insight into our patent strategy and any of the inner workings of the company. I'm obviously aware of that email, which seems very promotional to me, but yeah, he's not a spokesperson of the company, so it's really not our opinion that's represented there.
So the last part's true. Christian Angermeyer is not a spokesman of Compass. However, the idea that somebody who has invested as much, I think it's a cheddar bread, into Compass Pathways as Christian Angermeyer has no insights into their patent strategy is a bit hard to believe.
It's also bullshit for Lars to say that oh, we're a public company, so he's just an investor. Like, Angermeyer was invested in Compass before they were a public company. Angermeyer is credited in at least a couple press outlets as being like the seed funding that made Compass possible. In fact, if memory serves, Angermeyer and his investments were in the media before Lars was listed as the co-founder of Compass on the Compass website. So the notion that Angermeyer doesn't know what's going on or is somehow, making things up or making like bold and inaccurate statements. I mean, look, if they're a corporation that is looking to be successful and looking to play the game of capitalism, this is exactly what they should be doing. They should be trying to create walls around their intellectual property, inhibiting other people from getting onto the field to be able to challenge them. Hell, we know Peter Thiel is invested and involved in Compass and Atai, and Thiel has been quite explicit that you shouldn't try to compete. You should try to have a monopoly. Like, this isn't
Angermeyer and Thiel are like investing buddies too. They were both on EOS recently because they're failing as a crypto company. They just pivoted to creating a crypto exchange called Bullish, and both. It's actually more than that. It's like kind of the little triumvirate is Peter Thiel, Christian Angermeyer, and Mike Novogratz. They're the three initial outside investors in Compass Pathways. They're also on EOS, and there's some other companies that are out there. Yeah, and to say that Angermeyer is just some ignorant guy who has no idea what's going on. I mean, like, Peter Thiel just installed one of the Thiel Capital guys, Cam. Is it Jason Cam?
Jason Cam. Yep.
As a director at Compass, they know what's going on. Like,
so it's the point where if it wasn't a kind of like the kind of pious fraud that is often propagated to sell a narrative to investors, to consumers, to regulators that capitalists often employ, Christian Angermeyer might be actually insulted, right? This guy's got millions in Compass, and apparently he has no insight into the inner workings of this company. Come on.
Yeah.
specifically about how you think that we can create specific measures to avoid exploitation of indigenous lands and culture. This is a question taken from Valeria in the audience. How is it that Western psychedelic medicine in a for-profit context can respect past indigenous cultures that have used psychedelic medicine?
How about present ones?
Yeah, I was going to say
I'll
past.
answer that.
You
First.
can keep.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I've come across, again, this is not to say my main area of expertise, but I have been speaking to people and kind of come across various different models. One is some kind of reciprocality to indigenous groups where these practices came from. I think it's an important idea. I also think it's difficult to implement, and I think it's quite new. So I think there's a lot more work to be done in kind of figuring out what that looks like and how it works. I see it as applying.
What's new?
The notion of reciprocity?
Well,
That's what it sounded like, but that surely isn't.
I think he's saying that it's new to try and consider indigenous cultures like for anything.
I can tell you that anyone in the C-suite or any investor of Compass just laughs their fucking head off at a question like this. To think that what? It's like it's just it's silly. It's silly.
Ayahuasca and potentially psilocybin, but in different ways. And there's also it raises a really interesting question as well, because it raises the question of what worldview are we selecting for as psychedelics enter the mainstream? If I have a psychedelic experience in a clinic or now in a clinical trial, and I have a past life experience, or I have an encounter with an entity, what ontology, what worldview am I going to be making sense of it through? Probably not CBT, because it's like it's a bit out of the realm, right? Maybe Jungian model, but
maybe rebel
there are
wisdom,
many different models out there from different cultures.
Sense making, rebel
and
wisdom.
In a sense, there's a kind of there's a tension between our worldviews, between worldviews, let's say. So it's a mistake to import, like, say, a Shipibo model and mix it with a bit of Buddhism and a bit of Hinduism and create some kind of mishmash worldview and have people try and interpret the experience through that.
What does he think of the Santo Daime?
To only use our frames, and so there's a certain,
like that's a syncretic model. That's a mix, a
mishmash.
Of
really genuinely listen.
Let's pause it. We can hear Alex's words. But no, the point is worth talking about, because I teach on this topic, and of the psychedelic religions that are like recognized by the United States government, by the Brazilian government, these are in fact mishmash syncretic projects. Where
and all that have an element of Christianity, the ones that are
all of them
sanctioned in the United States, all have Christianity as a component, which is just very telling that indigenous traditions that are not related to Christianity are not included in these protections.
Yeah. As does the Bwiti tradition, which again, we're having a conversation about capitalism that not once, and I'm going to say not once, has mentioned colonization. So
I would also just like, because Sandra, I don't know how to pronounce it, so sorry if I say it wrong, but mentioned the Chacruna reciprocity initiatives. And I feel like it's worth mentioning just like our own concerns around that, where Chacruna is like very happy to be playing like the field for the corporate interests. And so it's almost as if the reciprocity initiatives are allowing these corporations to kind of like, what's the word, where the laundering their reputation, the recuperating, these, allowing them
fractal
to
wash
seem like they are doing these great things
washing?
when
I
actually
like that.
it's only like kind of cleaning the surface and making it shiny and not addressing the fundamentally problematic practices that these corporations are based on.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think it's worth pointing out too. I think in one of the conferences in the past year, below all of their sponsors, they had a statement saying that they don't endorse their sponsors, right? So they have a bunch of like corporadelic firms sponsoring their conference, but then they're clear to then attempt to like distance themselves from those entities, but then sort of, yeah, as Sandra just said, like enable them to show up and present themselves as though they're doing good. And Normie Pace and I had a conversation with somebody where they were talking about how they were trying to spearhead these initiatives for corporadelic firms to give back a percentage of their profits to the indigenous groups. And we pointed out that folks like Christian Angermeyer and others are involved in extractive industry. Like when some of the same corporations who are destroying indigenous land bases are then turning around and saying, well, through our psychedelic arm, we're actually giving back 5, 10, 15% of whatever profits we might hope to make. Like that, to my mind, that's not reciprocity. Like when I hear indigenous folks make claims about what they want, usually at the top of that list is land back. It's autonomy. Yeah. It's the ability for self-determination, divorced from, capitalist extraction, the state, the rest of it. And this notion that somehow like paying a measly sum is somehow reciprocal, it doesn't track.
It's also important to note that, like, when we're talking about questions or rather realities of colonization, these are ongoing issues. We're not just like relitigating the past and engaging some kind of like outrage archaeology here. Indigenous communities survived colonization, and somebody mentioned Maria Sabina in the comments here. Without Maria Sabina and the tradition that she inherited, the incredible survival. There's a woman, the author of the Indigenous History of America, talked about terminal narratives, about how historians describe the fall and conquest of indigenous cultures rather than their resistance and survival. And the psychedelic community would not exist as it currently does. Doesn't really have a foundation to stand upon without the resistance of indigenous groups on multiple continents to colonization. That is an ongoing process, and that ongoing process is fully continuous with the commodification of psychedelics, with this modern IP strategy that will privilege white latecomers to the game, credentializing people who don't come from a hereditary tradition. And I'm not saying that that's the only way to get there, but if the medicalization project succeeds, that will be the effect.
Yeah, I don't know. They're like expecting Compass, or even asking the question about Compass and
it's
reciprocity silly. With the Shipibo. That's like in the East India Company. How are you going to improve the lives of like these people? It's
right.
Wow.
No, that's a fantastic metaphor. And I will say that we don't even bother to clip and respond to Lars's response to it, because he basically says, well, we don't do that. At least it's honest.
All right. Well, let's hear what these folks are talking about.
With experience through that, I think it's also a mistake to only use our frames. And so there's a certain I think importance of respecting and honoring and really genuinely listening to indigenous ways of knowing, and what that looks like practically on the ground. It kind of remains to be seen. We should have already talked about alternatives to the for-profit model as we know it, and there are many. And as people are pointing out in the chat, there is USONA, who have a commitment to open science, who are also in phase 2 and also have a synthesis of psilocybin. And then of course there's MAPS. MAPS is a great example of what can be done philanthropically and with things like data exclusivity, which is something Rick Doblin argues for, rather than patents, having the kind of exclusive control of your data and being able to to profit and be paid for the risk you've taken through that. I think
I just want to point out that MAPS is a different structure, but like MAPS is still a for-profit pharmaceutical company. It's not like
they're a B corporation.
Yeah, they're public benefit corp. Yep.
Right. It's just not like radically a different thing. They are pursuing a different strategy, but it is a for-profit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and again, back to that, not just for-profit, non-profit, but what are they doing in the world? And when you look at it, right, like whether it's the way that they sort of reinforce certain dynamics or narratives around like U.S. militarism, imperialism, the notion that Doblin has put out there that, you know, veterans and cops are perhaps more sympathetic than women suffering from PTSD as a result of sexual violence. I mean, the kinds of narratives that MAPS promotes, and looking at some of the real problems. I mean, with a participant abused in a clinical trial, with I mean, with the fact that we have this corporadelic takeover in the space as a result of MAPS rolling out the red carpet, you know, MAPS has enabled and facilitated this.
I think some folks are worried about that at the speed of that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I won't talk anymore.
That is something I would love to talk about with Lars, because the model of the pharma model where you get rewarded for the risk you take is usually for bringing a new drug to market. But again, psilocybin is not a new drug. It's a pre-existing molecule. And so I'm not saying that Compass hasn't taken any risk, but I'm saying that the risk that you've taken is not the same as the risk of bringing a completely new drug to market. Perhaps you disagree with that, but I would love to hear, Lars, about the alternatives that are out there, including yourself.
Sounds very much like a debate to me.
We know that it takes a lot of work, especially on not only running the clinical trials, because I feel that there are two ways where, or there are three ways where any drug could fail, right? One is can't be safe, can't be efficacious, and it can't be commercialized. Now, I think most people on this call would probably say that psilocybin has a good chance of being safe and efficacious.
A good chance.
Psilocybin could fail is on the commercialization front. And what I mean by that is, can we get it to patients? And again, to get it to patients, you cannot only run regulatory relevant studies, but you actually need to run studies that allow you to see what the utility for healthcare systems of providing that treatment will be. Now, those are much larger studies required, because in the current situation is, you know, you're depressed, you go to your GP, the GP says, oh, you're not feeling well, we're going to give you an SSRI. Now, the SSRI doesn't work, you come back, you're going to be put on another SSRI or an SNRI. If that doesn't work, tricyclic or atypical antipsychotic.
Or it works.
The problem with that is these drugs are all genericized, so they're very cheap.
That's the problem. They're very cheap.
Yeah. There we go.
What happened to the stakeholders? This is what I said earlier about generics. Like, this is literally...
Lars doesn't actually know how to read the room. He doesn't know whether he's talking to an investor meeting or to customers, you know, end users, he might say. Yeah.
And I just want to point out, so Vortex Tube has asked, why don't we concern ourselves with the grassroots community and providing safe access? And I think that's one of the comparisons that we're trying to draw out in trying to offer a critical perspective of this non-debate and bring into comparison with the viewpoints that both Lars and Ali are offering, to try to highlight that, in fact, you know, when you've got Lars on here talking about how generics are too cheap or whatever, and that therefore there's not enough incentive to pursue them, right? It highlights that his comments about stakeholder and stakeholder access and benefit and all of that are first. Yeah, except for profits, right? And so that's right. Just it. Like, I think we're
said was the reverse before.
Well, yes. This is again, he doesn't know what audience he's talking to. He doesn't know what problems are problems to what group he's talking to. And I mean, don't get me wrong, he's eloquent. He's doing a good job of talking about his organization. But I think he's still sort of phoning it in. I don't know.
He's being honest in what he's saying here.
Yeah, he is. No,
he's being very honest.
We should take him at his word. I would agree.
You're going to be put on another SSRI or an SNRI if that doesn't work, tricyclic, or atypical antipsychotic. The problem with that is these drugs are all genericized, so they're very cheap. And the problem is that psilocybin will have to be compared against that on an efficacy-weighted basis. That's why we're very much focusing on treatment-resistant depression. That's where the cost for the system is the highest. So direct cost of a patient suffering with treatment-resistant depression is between 17 to 25,000 US dollars a year. Since these patients do not improve, that's a recurring cost. And that's what we're focusing on the commercial side, is running the clinical trials that are required to also generate that evidence.
So let's just talk about how all of the things that Lars is engaging with are these institutional structures that have built up through a political process, oftentimes through reaction to things like thalidomide, which was a disaster in Europe that was prevented in the United States, that led to things like double-blinded research trials.
Was it prevented in the United States?
Largely, yeah. And it's one of the reasons why the double-blind standard came about. So okay, yeah. The reality that institutional inertia, which is talked about a lot by the people who are in the corporadelic side, it's a reality, but it's a reality that has been severely undercut by people gathering signatures in cities and in states. So to pretend like it's just the way things are is playing pretend.
So I also want to just point out that when Lars talks about how psilocybin will need to be compared to SSRIs or current pharmaceutical regimens, yes, but no, right? Because we're not talking about psilocybin on its own. It's psilocybin-assisted psychedelic or psychotherapy. And so James Coyne, and I'll throw this article into the chat across platforms, but James Coyne recently published a little Medium piece that was critical about the recent phase 3 MDMA for PTSD research that MAPS published. And he actually points out that we're not just talking about MDMA for treatment of PTSD. We're talking about MDMA plus an unproven and highly questionable psychotherapeutic method. And so when we're comparing the efficacy of, say, psilocybin to SSRIs, we have to remember that we're talking about the pairing of psilocybin plus whatever therapeutic method. There's questions about consistency across study sites, across participants. There's questions about what methods have been used. Again, looking at the MAPS Canada backed clinical trial phase 2, where there was abuse. Like, we have huge questions about what sort of, quote, therapeutic methods were used there. And then if we look sort of at where some of this might go, we've been here before. Like, we can look at what happened with the first round of SSRIs, where they were heralded as like total game changers, and the researchers involved in that were super dedicated to their clients, to the study participants, and had phenomenal results. And now when we look, we see SSRIs are barely more statistically significant than placebo, if memory serves, or looking at
or compared to three vigorous exercise sessions per week.
Yeah, or looking at the Kentucky, the ARC, the opiate farm in Kentucky, which was also a site of like MK Ultra experiments. There was a multidisciplinary approach to pain management, where sure, there were opiates used, but there was also a wide variety of therapies based on patients, participants, clients' needs. And when it came time to roll that stuff out to the market and to engage in capitalism, what it turned out is that insurance companies didn't want to cover anything other than the pills. So they worked to strip away all of the multidisciplinary aspects. And this helped feed some of the dynamics that went into the huge opiate overdose crisis that we're now seeing alongside pill mills and companies like Janssen over promoting the safety and efficacy of opiates. So again, like, I just want to highlight that psychotherapeutic component as we're doing these sort of drug comparisons is incredibly important and something that we've seen before. We've seen how this works.
I just want to engage briefly before we get back into it with Lars's initial statement, which is that drugs fail because they're either found to be not safe, efficacious, or commercializable. According to the World Health Organization, psilocybin is the least problematic illicit drug, Schedule 1 drug that exists based on harm to community, harm to individuals, based on things like emergency room visits. So even presenting psilocybin as a question as to whether or not it's safe from a health perspective should cause suspicion. Anyhow, just want to say that.
Another model, which is neither the pharma profit model or not-for-profit model, is the Oregon model. And Oregon is currently in the phase of having legalized psilocybin for therapeutic use, now in the phase of figuring out how to best do it. It's going through the state healthcare. And that is a completely different model. And Lars, I wonder, I'm curious whether you are worried about that model.
Yeah, no, I disagree. It's a good point that you bring it up.
There's a disagreement.
I disagree, right? It's an alternative model, and I think the people of Oregon have voted. So kudos to them. The issue you're going to have here is if you don't develop a drug through the regulatory models, the health insurances will not reimburse it. So while it might be great, depending on whatever the model shapes out to be in Oregon, that some people can access it, the question is still, if a patient has to access psilocybin therapy a couple of times with a therapist, let's do a quick calculation. Let's say you keep it very lean, right? You have only one therapist, you have 2 preparatory sessions, you have 2 integration sessions, and the day is maybe 8 hours, right? That gives you a total number of 12 hours. And the average cost of a therapist in the US is somewhere between $100 and $200 an hour. So the average psilocybin session will cost between $1,200 and $2,400 US dollars. The question is, who can really afford that, especially, maybe a few times a year. It's going to be far in between that people can access that. Now, it's a great model for the people that can afford it. That's not what we're focused on. We're focused on the average depressed person that we want to support, right? And for that, our view is we need to develop it through the medical model. And there will be very many other models, right? I think I'm applauding decriminalization, right? I think no one should go to jail. I think the decrim model is a bit misguided because very few people go to jail for psychedelic use. Most people go to jail for, if they're Black, they go to jail because of marijuana use or crack cocaine use. That's really the majority of people in jail, but in the United States, and I think
it's not the majority of people in jail in the United States. It's a ridiculous statement. Almost everybody who's in jail is not there for drugs. But
what's that book you recommended?
Locked In.
Yeah.
Locked In
by John Pfaff. Read that if you haven't. Blow your mind. It's amazing.
Yeah, and as Sandra points out, decrim is not just about going to jail.
Right.
No,
exactly.
It's not.
It's a good point.
It's about having access to federal student loans, for instance, and a number of other issues. So thank you, Sandra, for pointing that out. I want to point out at this moment here the lack of I think in the capitalistic world it's called due diligence that was done for this debate, because right here we have Lars Wilde making certain assertions about decriminalization that don't seem to be consistent with the actions of the company that he represents, that he works for. According to Dr. Bronner, who wrote
David
something.
Bronner.
David Bronner. Yeah, I mean, is he a doctor?
No.
That's the company.
Okay, so David Bronner, he wrote a piece called, I'll throw it in the chat, called Sounding the Alarm on Compass's Interference with Oregon's Psilocybin Therapy Program. And just briefly quoting from it. He says, "I wanted to flag here what isn't well known yet. Information was provided to the Healing Advocacy Fund, which is overseeing smooth implementation of Oregon psilocybin therapy, Measure 109 in Oregon. According to this information, George Goldsmith, CEO and co-founder of Compass, recently started reaching out to several psychedelic researchers at OHSU, the Oregon Health and Science University, in an attempt to drum up concern and mobilize opposition to implementing 109 in Oregon." So I just wanted to contrast that statement, that information that is already in the public record, to the conversation that ensues, or rather the lack of conversation about these issues.
Just a little transparency. Just a little transparency here is that David is also a board member of MAPS, and MAPS has accepted $500,000 from both George and Katya, and I think at least a couple $100,000 from Angermeyer too. So like the people who they're complaining about, or they're raising the flags, they have also gladly accepted their money.
Well, there's intimate knowledge of their operations here, which in some ways makes it all the more like glaring that none of this is being discussed, and it does not come up in this discussion. It's a huge oversight by the moderators, by Alex Gearing, I guess also by Lars, who probably should. Excuse
Alex
me.
Beiner.
I blame you, Nishay. Alex Beiner. But hey, this is a good point to plug the fact that Nishay has
we
just
plugged
come
at the
out.
beginning too.
Whatever, we're gonna plug it again.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna
Save
replug,
Pace's mistake and
plug
replug
and
it.
plug again.
Yeah, plug
Yeah.
it again. Jeez.
We good?
Yeah.
It's great that drugs are increasingly decriminalized. That's where the focus should be. You're going to have probably a recreational use model where people will have other ways to access it. You see that in the Netherlands. A lot of centers are flourishing there, synthesis, etc. They are overbooked. Again, the sessions cost thousands of dollars. And that limits access, right? The only thing that will provide access is reimbursement. And again, that's what we're focused on. I also feel that the debate is in kind of the psychedelic world is very much US centric, right? And, who knows how the US situation will shape up. But if we look at Europe, right, when we think about the UK and Germany and the other larger European countries, they can't even legalize cannabis, right? So what are the chances that such a model will be successful in Europe? Very slim. And so I feel that for patients at the moment, the biggest chance is to go through the medical route, do the work required, work with the system, deliver the data, and get the treatments approved. That's our focus.
I mean, I agree that I don't think the decrim is going to probably be a thing in Europe. Just being practical about it, I don't necessarily see that happen. I see that happen more in the United States.
I mean, that said, we've had some conversations with folks in the EU about that process. In some ways, at least from an access perspective, psychedelic medical, it's a different story in Europe, given that really socialized medicine there. It's just the same.
Well, but it does become questions of. Yeah, it becomes questions of supply. It becomes questions of when we're talking about monopolist dynamics and all of that, like in the case of the EU and the European Medicine Agency and all of that, like if you're able to be the manufacturer for the drug used in this drug psychotherapy combo, how can you throw your weight around? Also, because if memory serves, the way that the EMA functions is that they require both to show like cost sort of efficacy, and then also to make a case as far as the populations that you'll serve, and basically like how this would be applied. I already have concerns about the narratives around psychedelics for vulnerable populations. So like treatment resistant conditions where people are willing to sort of do And I want to be clear, I'm not blaming participants or clients for this. Like, I recognize they're at the end of the rope. But when you're at the end of your rope and a therapist says, this is what you need to do in order to get healing, you are that much more likely to follow through with that. And so we've seen in the case of like Keith Ablow, who was an abusive ketamine practitioner, women flew out to basically live in close proximity to him. He abused them. The allegations are he turned them into sex slaves, made one of them get an ownership tattoo, held a gun to one of their heads, like really fucked up stuff. And so like, in the case of Europe, like I'm concerned if there's this stated need that these compounds have to be used for particular populations, and those populations end up like sort of targeting or hoping to treat more vulnerable populations, what sort of potential for harm do we see as these sorts of organizations have a profit incentive as the suppliers to sort of move things or frame things in that direction? Again, we don't have good data, but yeah.
One thing Norman, I wanted to just, go ahead, Norman.
No, you go.
Just real quick, with regard to Lars saying, the failures of changes in drug policy in the EU, should be cause for despair and an argument for corporatization, medicalization there. We have to recall our history. We have to understand that the reality is that the drug laws globally are downstream of the drug laws that were enacted first in the United States with the Controlled Substances Act of 70 and 71. And then they went to the UN and they used the bully pulpit of the United States as a world police in this case to push similar laws everywhere in the world. So once again, like just not knowing history or understanding liberatory political processes or pretending to not understand them, underestimating the power of decriminalization efforts to globally, I think it does a disservice to this discussion. Normie, what were you going to say?
It was just a little tangent. I was just wondering if Rwandans would be considered in the vulnerable populations in Europe, and and the people fleeing the guy that Angermeyer works with, if they would be eligible. It was a cocky point, but it was a valid point.
It's a fair point. Paul Kagame, just because it's always worth mentioning. Angermeyer is on the Presidential Advisory Council.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah,
I want to do some more on that. The response in the psychedelic community about that has been fucking dismal. I'm actually reading a good book by a British journalist now called "Do Not Disturb." It's about the history of Paul Kagame and Rwanda and the genocide and all of that, and it's really terrible. And this is the guy that Christian Angermeyer, who's the investor for Compass, and who runs a Thai, he works with Kagame on the Kagame's presidential advisory board. Kagame has, disappeared lots of people, political opponents. The book is about the murder of one of his guys who basically defected, and they murdered him in a hotel room. And actually, if anyone is familiar with Hotel Rwanda, the guy that is in that is actually being prosecuted under terrorism charges. They kidnapped him. They had intelligence reroute his plane. I believe he thought he was flying somewhere in Europe, and he ended up in Rwanda. And now he's being tried on terrorism charges. So yeah, I've learned a lot about Rwanda now because of Angermeyer, which is kind of bizarre. All right, let's continue.
I noticed a lot of what you're saying is around a strategy of speed, and kind of getting it rolled out quicker rather than slower. I personally don't think that's a good idea, because I don't think we're ready for it, and I don't think our existing systems are set up for that. I like the work of Bennett Zellner, who's an economist who's worth checking out. He talks about the pollination approach, which is where we have much more of a grassroots focus. And we actually speak to the underlying causes of the mental health crisis, which are to do as much, depending on who you talk to, with a deep lack of meaning and purpose in culture, a deep sense of economic disenfranchisement, a loss of connection, a loss of community. We're seeing in a lot of studies that it's as beautiful and amazing as psychedelic assisted therapy is, it's not really just that, and it alone even doesn't work. It's also connection to other people, connection to community, a reason to do what you do, a reason to get up in the morning. We live in a culture which, for one of the first times in history, we don't really know what our culture is for, or where we're meant to be going. So there are there's a meta crisis and a meaning crisis.
I want to, like, he's correct in he's correct in that a lack of meaningful existence is probably one of that combined with financial stress is probably some of the biggest causes of a lot of the mental health issues. Mm-hmm. But then it's like there's no logical progression that it's the system. The reason why there's no connection is because someone's spending 40 to 70 hours a week not with their family, not with their friends, working for some shit ass job, trying to get by, can't come up with a payment when something big comes up. It's just some of the analysis is there, and then he just swings and misses on what the actual cause of
these
this
are.
It's incredible.
These are features. They're right. Features, and they're not bugs of the system that is ostensibly being discussed here in a debate about psychedelics and capitalism. And I mean, I agree with you, Brian, in that Alex is talking pretty eloquently about real issues. It's everyday people. I think there's a resonance to what Alex is bringing up here. But
Does
the connection,
Alex, because I've heard it by Ali.
Is it Alexander?
I've heard people call him Ali.
I actually have seen corrected.
I don't know. I mean,
I tend to call people who are Alexander Alex.
That's fine. I just know he does go by Ali as well. Sorry to interrupt.
So
I think isn't there? Okay, thank you for the correction though.
I didn't mean to interrupt though. I'm sorry.
Oh, you want to?
I just wanted to point out. So I think he starts off pretty reasonably. He ends with like absolute thought leader bullshit.
You stole the words.
Yeah, I mean, I threw so we did a podcast sort of outlining differences between like thought leaders and critics based on Anand Giridhas's book Winners Take All, and discussing some of his comparisons between thought leaders and public intellectuals. And I want to say that Beiner's sort of treatment of these things, where he's unwilling to actually name the structural problems, right? So we have Sandra in chat saying exactly this: trauma, racism, inequity, social injustice, meaning making isn't the central issue. And if we look at what's going on in the world, it's like, we can talk about the fallout of capitalism, and we should be talking about the fallout of capitalism. But if you're looking to get invites to these sorts of non-debates and other conversations or events within the so-called psychedelic community, many people, particularly event organizers, don't want to have those types of contentious discussions, because they seem to prefer the narratives that we can all get along because, hey, this is an evolution, not a revolution.
And they're also chasing donors and sponsorships. Come on.
Well, exactly. And it keeps people with the money happier. And so, like, I think that this kind of analysis is particularly insidious because it doesn't result in like meaningful or explanatory frameworks that allow for political or participatory action. And sorry, Pace, did you want to jump in with something?
Well, I was going to say it's not so much like insidious isn't the word. The word is recuperation. It's a blunting of a radical analysis that addresses systemic features, systemic contradictions, things that you can't rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. You need to steer the ship in a different direction.
It'd be win-win. You can't be win-lose.
Yeah,
actually,
but go on.
The recuperation that you point out is sort of the perfect tie-in, because I was going to say I quite like Bennett Zellner, and I appreciate the conversations I've had with him, but most of the time when I hear people refer to the pollination model, I kind of turn off, because when you actually ask them what they mean by it, they don't mean anything by it. They point to the pollination model because Zellner put it out there and it's presented as an alternative. But if you actually engage with the implications of what like truly enacting aspects even of the pollination model would require, it's an anti-capitalist approach. Like, even if Zellner doesn't necessarily mean it like that, like the way that it would, like if you actually look at what it would take to implement it and survive onslaught from entrenched corporations, businesses, big money actors, like fundamentally you are going to have to take some pretty staunch anti-capitalist positions to enact some of the communal spaces and sort of non-commodified relationships that it calls for, in my opinion. So the notion that this person, who has been quite clear, he's not an anti-capitalist, he's an entrepreneur, he doesn't think capitalism is all that bad. The fact that he then points to this model as a signpost, but then gives no real engagement with what that world looks like, I think it's further indication of that.
Well, I want to point to Nishé's work on sort of trickle-down consciousness that has been put out there in the sort of rebel wisdom world. Nishé, do you have any comment on any of this?
You mean just the idea of focusing on like the elites, or?
Yeah. I mean, just go off.
Well, what about it were you?
Well, like,
whatever you want.
So, I mean, the idea here is that, like, what is being put forth by Ali is that, we're not anti-capitalist. We have a crisis of meaning. So if we're not anti-capitalist, we're working within capitalism. And so
Can you guys hear him?
What's
or
the
no?
way forward? And his okay.
It was awesome pace.
That was
Wait, what
great.
just happened?
You froze at least 2 large chunks of that, so we got a bunch of garble throughout. Can you give us another rundown?
I have no idea what he just said.
We're having trouble making meaning of your articulation.
Yeah.
That was terrible. That was some good shit. I can't remake that. I'm sorry.
Oh no.
So I'll throw one out there for Nishé in the context of trickle down consciousness. So my recollection is that you first sort of floated that around like Lucian Tarnowski and Jamie Wheel and some of the Rebel Wisdom conversations.
Yeah, because that phrase is used in Stealing Fire, which was Jamie Wheel's co-written first book before his more recent book. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, at a foundation, like, can you explain like what? So trickle down economics is this notion, right, that you give money to the richest people and they somehow spread it around the community. And so we're looking at a sort of de facto hierarchical arrangement, and that somehow, like, if memory serves, and sorry if I'm messing this up, but like the notion of trickle down consciousness is like there are some sort of noble leaders who are better equipped and ought to be in charge. And if we can imbue them with some sort of psychedelically fueled revelatory consciousness space, they will make all of our lives better. Like,
so
how does that work?
If you can find Elon Musk at a really cool dome and have a great psychedelic experience with him at Burning Man, then he, being the billionaire that he is, has the resources to take those insights and implement changes with them, and so that will change society because he has so much power. But that goes back to Anand Rajadas's whole critique of philanthropist kind of capitalism, that we shouldn't be relying on the people who benefit from the current system to reform that system, and that there's more democratic approaches to social change have more kind of staying power from his perspective. So it's kind of putting those two pieces together.
Yeah, and why
am
would
I
the
coming
people who are
through?
benefiting? Yes, you are. Just as a
Okay.
follow up to that, just like why would the
Well,
people who are benefiting so much like actually be invested in changing the system so that they'd benefit less? Going back to that win-win or win-win-win question.
Mm-hmm. And I want to address what Nishay just sort of left off on is the idea that more democratic solutions are options. They are options that are not not typically brought into discussions about how we can bring psychedelics into wider usage. Like nobody at Psymposia thinks psychedelics are bad. We think they're good, actually. It's just that the structures being built around
It's naive to
them.
think that they're going to solve like deep problems that have to do with wage slavery and like all these things. It's naive. It's extremely naive to think that it's just going to make those deep problems go away. It's ridiculous, and stop thinking that way because it's a problem.
Por favor. And then I think why I wanted to go in this direction is just to talk about the ways in which, if we're going to be talking about psychedelic capitalism, if the narrative is the problem with psychedelic capitalism is that it's not it's not bringing the leaders of industry into the consciousness singularity quick enough or something, we're having the wrong conversation. That's not what a real critique of capitalism looks like. And one of the things that we're attempting to do, that we're doing at Psymposia, is connecting larger critiques of capitalism to this emerging market, this commodification, this taking of substances that have been criminalized into a gray and above ground market, and we're making certain predictions. Go on, she.
Well, I just wanted to say, I had just seen earlier, I was watching YouTube, and this ad for the Infinite film came up. Have you guys heard of that?
No.
So I don't know much about. I only know what the trailer was saying, but it's relevant because it's like there's like 500 people who are like uniquely gifted with this ability to like remember all of these skills and things that they learned from their past lives and like carry that forward. And these like 500 people in the world out of all the billions of people have this like kind of special ability to interact and do various things. And the way that I kind of see Rebel Wisdom and the Jamie Wheels of the world are like, they feel that there are these people that are actually like more capable and more able to impact society and change the world in a meaningful way. But that makes me think of, I just pulled it up, the Rutger Bregman talk. He's the guy who went to Davos and was like, bro, you got to tax people. Like,
oh, yeah.
all of these like rich people, talking about this win-win capitalism. And he's like, taxes.
Fuck your philanthropy, pay taxes.
Yeah, so he did a really excellent, actually showed this class and this video to my bioethics class at Case Western when I was teaching. It's a TED Talk, but it's called Poverty Isn't a Lack of Character, It's a Lack of Cash. And so it's like a lot of the reason why like poorer people like have a harder time with things is just the like stress, acute stress and just like difficulty of trying to live like under the boot basically. And so it's like the idea that we have to just accept that some people are better and like kind of more capable and have these special skills, and we have to focus on those people to change the world rather than just getting the boot off of the neck of the people who are entirely capable of deciding what is best for them and how they want to live their lives. Like that's, I think, what we as an organization, that's what distinguishes us and our interest from some of these other actors in the space.
And that's just such an incredibly disempowering like worldview. I don't know why someone would want to.
Well, it's exciting like that. The reason that movie is being made, I think, is because it's like, exciting to think that there's this like elite band of like Navy SEALs that's gonna, go to Burning Man and kind of make the thing and fix everything. But like it's ultimately just like a fairy tale that you're telling yourself. And I don't think that we should be making social decisions based on what like your favorite like LARP is in the moment.
Yeah, based on
it's like the
fantasies of
X-Men,
rich folks.
but for policy.
All right, let's get back into this because we got some more to do.
How do we avoid what happened with weed and what happened with K? What happened with, medical marijuana and what happened with medical ketamine?
I believe the cannabis plant has a lot to offer for patients, and it's actually a pity that it's not being explored. And I hope the same doesn't happen to psychedelics, right? If you take away the motive to fund research, you're not going to get the answers, and maybe you get to some patients, but you're not going to get the big answer of what these substances would be able to do. I think you also mentioned ketamine. I think for ketamine, it's a similar situation in that a lot of off-label use has happened, and people have started paying out of pocket for it. Some insurers have, in the States, have started to pay for racemic ketamine. Janssen, pharma arm of Johnson & Johnson, developed S-ketamine. Now they were suddenly coming into a market where the psychiatrists make much more money from selling racemic ketamine out of pocket, where they charge $600 a pop. They pay 50 cents for a vial of ketamine, so the net profit is $600 for the administration. So they don't want to deliver S-ketamine. So S-ketamine, which is reimbursed, didn't make it to patients.
Do we need to play all this? Like, this
yeah,
is
we can
like,
stop.
We
can
I'm sorry. Like, I'm losing patience.
There's plenty here.
Hang on.
I just like his central point
is rectified. I believe that
about
no,
people
let's hear his central point.
Aren't gonna want to like innovate if there's not this like financial motive.
Not just innovate, also provide care. Right?
Can someone remind me when like all of the like interesting sort of both off the wall and like more like focused psychedelic research has taken place? Like, was that before or after the corporadelic rush? Like, like thinking about the sort of research questions that have been asked and explored for decades, like we actually didn't see a pivot towards a pretty singular focus on like treatment of depression and things of that until the corporate dollars got involved. So like this notion that somehow if there's not a market, people won't want to do interesting research doesn't really hold up.
It's ridiculous. No, it's ridiculous. Like
I was just like, are we just listening to him drone on about S-ketamine? Sorry, you go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that I spent almost a fucking decade of my life studying corn. Okay, plenty of research dollars
to make some popcorn
going to fucking corn. Okay, and
if you spent a decade listening to corn, you can spend 3 minutes listening to ketamine.
No, I guess what I'm saying is like anything that rises to the level of industrial production, distribution and consumption. There's plenty of dollars to chisel another percentage point of profit off of an existing market. Now, his point about, people preferring racemic ketamine over S-ketamine, he's just telling on himself. They're like, well, why should I use S-ketamine when racemic, which is ketamine, by the way, it's the left hand and the right hand molecules in a roughly 50-50 mixture for those of you who don't speak chemistry. But like it works. And ketamine clinics have been scheduled to for a long time. It's a growing market. But what he's actually arguing for in a capitalist kind of context, this is actually what Chomsky says. He says, the masters of the universe, they don't lie. They don't hide what it is that they're doing. What Lars just said is that currently under the American healthcare system, people who have the ability to provide ketamine therapy won't do it unless they make a certain amount of money. Now, okay, a certain amount of money, we can argue about what that might be, but he's pointing to profiteering, the withholding of care. And I have argued occasionally that in the United States, you take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. And in the United States, overwhelming medical debt is the number one cause of bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a great predictor for a number of other health conditions. And I would argue that those medical professionals who are not actively working towards some kind of socialized healthcare system in the United States are in violation of their oaths.
Well, and currently the financial incentives to go and be like an MD, like medical doctor, like it's attracting a lot of people who want money and don't actually want to care for people. You know,
kind of got to make some money to pay off your $600,000 debt too.
It's almost like there's a perverse incentive structure.
Because it's like if your model is like based on like luring people from like money to be there, like rather than like just like people who are genuinely like drawn to help, you know, others, as like not just because they're gonna make bank doing that.
Yeah, but this is the other issue with ketamine clinics, that like they're being leveraged by people who want to be in that early mover position for broader psychedelic clinics. So you have people who are setting up ketamine clinics because when, you know, they believe that MDMA or psilocybin, whatever else, will eventually be approved for medical use, and they want to be able to make some claim as having proficiency or just being able to be on the landscape and saying, hey, we're here, we're doing psychedelic therapy already, and so when this rolls out, trust us, we're experts. And in fact, there's already like Canada is sketchy as hell, sorry if anyone's Canadian, for both like sort of these reverse takeover corporations that are getting into psychedelics, but also for ketamine providers. And looking at, somebody sent me a website the other day where it's a ketamine clinic that straight up has MDMA and psilocybin already listed on the website, even though they're not approved and there's nothing there. They also invite people to like donate or support their clinic in some rather griftery ways. But I think the use of ketamine as sort of, pardon the term, a gateway drug for some of these clinics is a little alarming, precisely because of that profit motive and questions about duty of care.
All right, let's get back into this.
For all of us in psychedelics and how to get it right. And so we're obviously deeply analyzing these cases to not make the same mistakes.
Hang on,
again.
I get a rewind.
And so that it actually reaches the people that need it. And so there's 600 for the administration. So they don't want to deliver esketamine. So esketamine, which is reimbursed, didn't make it to patients because the providers in that case said, look, I make a lot of money and with my little practice here, deeply analyzing these cases to not make the same mistakes again.
You know, when you mentioned, Lars, around that there's a lack of incentive for more research, I don't know whether that incentive has to, like, this perpetual incentive for the market to keep growing is part of the problem, I think. And
Isn't that capitalism?
The whole conversation we're having here is about alternative modes of approaching things. Because when do we stop?
Yeah.
When do we, let's say we're 20 years from now, there's psychedelic clinics everywhere, pretty much every indication is covered. When do we stop that? And like, if we have an incentive structure that is to keep it growing, we need to keep giving people reasons to take psychedelics. So we need to have billboards like, hey, you feeling upset? Yeah, just go through a breakup, LSD. That's the problem. The problem is the inbuilt incentive structure. And this is not an anti-capitalist argument so much as a perverse incentive argument. So I think to prevent it going that way is to clean up the incentive structure.
If it was a good argument, it would be an anti-capitalist argument.
Ouch! Tell us how you really feel.
That is how I feel. Like I don't mean any disrespect. I'm engaging with ideas in a good faith manner here. If we're going to talk about how psychedelic capitalism operates and how capitalism operates, and we're going to make predictions. And he's making pretty good predictions here, predictions that have previously been made by who has expressed the same concerns, the commercialization and advertising of like the mystical experience. It has a sort of disquiet about branding the ineffable.
So just one point I wanted to make. I don't want to interrupt you, Pace. You want to finish that point?
That's a good spot.
One point I wanted to make is, so he's sort of like, so you have this infinite growth that's happening. It's maybe it'll transition to recreational. Maybe it'll be, as Bob and others have called it, for the betterment of well people. Yeah, maybe it moves there, but it doesn't. I don't think it has to move there, because that is also sort of assuming that if you go in for PTSD, depression, whatnot, that you're going to be kind of cured. You're not going to ever have to go back, and I don't believe that that's going to be the case. The companies are definitely going to figure out a way to redose you once a year, once every 24 months, something like that.
Eventually,
to get you back in.
The military, right? Maintenance therapies.
There's going to be some kind of maintenance therapy, and I don't even know if that means that that's a perverse incentive there or something like that. That actually might be the action of the drug that has a sort of a therapeutic effect between 6 and 12 months, something like that, right?
Right.
But, since, so much of what we discuss is that, a lot of these mental health conditions that are going to be treated as sort of economic, socioeconomic, capitalist fallout conditions, I don't know if the company is really going to need to move to a recreational type prescribing or something like that, because since the system is not changing, or since it's changing at maybe a glacial pace, the doors are going to be, people are going to be walking in the doors for a long time. So I don't think that you have to move into those sort of recreational, get better with your husband or wife or partner or something like that, or open your mind type consciousness expansion type stuff. I don't know if the market's ever going to go there. They got plenty of people.
Well, and Christian Angermeyer has talked about that, how the market is growing for better or worse, even if you only treat people a couple of times or a handful of times, there's a big enough market. I mean, hell, looking at it from the other end of the clinicians you've got, or the researchers you've got, a number of years ago, Ben Sessa said, psilocybin therapy is amazing because 2 doses and people are cured. And it's explain to me how, if you're, if you're working multiple jobs without healthcare in order to take care of your well-being, you're dealing with the realities and abuses of capitalism on a daily basis. How is taking mushrooms twice going to cure you? You're going to wind up with the exact, or if not the exact same, the same sort of structural realities pressing down on you, the same fallout going on and on. Ecocide doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
If you have trouble paying your rent, psilocybin's not going to really help you out too much.
As I bring up every time this comes up, psilocybin therapy wouldn't be available to me right now. I don't have healthcare coverage. So there's that.
Yeah, you got to bring out the scalpel.
Yeah, go on and say what you're going to say, though.
Well, just if we look at the amount of grief, I mean, if we look at what's gone on with COVID, if we look at what's going on with ecocide, I could totally imagine taking psychedelics for what the academics are calling nature connectedness, right? And having a moment of relief or presence with your grief about what's going on ecologically. But when you come back and you spend time in a world where that shit is not changing, is not going away, the notion that grief isn't going to come back doesn't hold for me. So yeah,
and look, I don't want to kind of shit on the idea that the relief for people is temporary relief or however long it is. That's important. That is important. But it's not kind of sold that way. It's sold to kind of the cure. It's just going to kind of mask a lot of the problems, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, so with the environmental connectedness, they talked about, this is going to be a great thing for frontline, climate change activists or something. I've been studying climate change, or I studied climate change actively for a decade. Yeah, psychedelic intervention is on an existential level, helpful. But then you're sober again, and we are still barreling tuition for our children or our children's children. How I feel about that situation does not change it.
Did you see Louis Gomer or whatever came out? Did you see his thing about changing the moon spin or the orbit of the moon recently?
No.
Oh, it's funny. Watch it. All right, let's continue.
One point that you made is probably true that I wanted to go back to, right? When you talk about, why is the world suffering? Why is mental health exploding? And I agree with everything you said, right? It's a disease of disconnection from ourselves, from our environment, from nature, etc. And I think, the benefit that psychedelics have, and research has shown that, is that people better understand how to lead their lives, what the real priorities are. And so if people really believe in kind of the power of psychedelics to help people rectify their perception of what's important in their life, right, then I would say, we're all in the same boat, right? If people come out of these experiences better understanding themselves, their place in the world, that it's better to spend time with the people that are closest to you, that matter to you, instead of, running after the next shiny thing. I think, then our goals of helping patients are aligned with your goals and bringing about a psychedelic renaissance, right? And so I don't feel that there is a disconnection between kind of the objectives of the wider psychedelic community and the psychedelic medicalization. Now,
it's kind of just like a big sweeping statement. No, we're completely aligned. Our goals are completely aligned here.
Yeah, this is actually really common in what we were talking about earlier in terms of recuperation. We saw this in American electoral politics with Bernie Sanders supporters and basically all of the Democrats saying, "Oh, well, we're all trying to get to the same place, but our methods differ." And we here at Psymposia have actually issue with that kind of sentiment with the psychedelic renaissance in general. As we've said before, we're not all going the same place. We're not all trying to get to the same goal. We have different goals. We're not on the same team.
Yeah, and I kind of challenged I was talking to Dave recently, I kind of challenged the whole notion of the psychedelic renaissance. If anything, I think that a lot of the research has become like real streamlined, real just medicalized. Where's the research that's, where's all the consciousness research? Where's all the other real interesting things? It's real medical, everything medical.
Well, there's actually some interesting, like, philosophy of science, like, work that I've seen recently coming out around, like, consciousness and, different component, looking at the ego as like a multivariate thing that has, like, there's the narrative self and kind of like embodied self, and I find that work really interesting. But a lot of the mainstream research is pretty cookie cutter and kind of jostling for the next press release.
Yeah.
Actually, with regard to it's sort of strange to hear this. Maybe this is the truly conscious capitalism that we're seeing here. But to me, it's odd to hear Lars talking about, like, why are people suffering, and listing off a number of things that are are structural. We wrote about this in Dear Psychedelic Researchers. I threw it in the or I can throw it in the chat right now. But our open letter to psychedelic researchers to really discuss these causes of suffering, and this is where this debate there's not what discussion of the causes of suffering on a systemic level are dissociated from the reigning economic system. If we can attribute anything to the actions of humans, our mode of production, our social relations, the positive and negative gains, whether they be species that have been winked out of existence over the Industrial Revolution of the last 30,000 years, which, by the way, is roughly half, or the increase in infant mortality or a decrease in infant mortality. That can be attributed to things like hygiene. All of them do at the end of the day like have some sort of relationship with how we organize ourselves socially and economically, and that the name of that system, the name of that game, is capitalism. So yeah, that was absent. This is largely why we decided to spend some time, I would say, critiquing, but also engaging with this debate, because it was between two individuals who, have big financial stakes in how all this goes. Nonprofit.
Was it just
Looks
me
like
or
Dave's-
was Pace like I couldn't hear Pace?
Oh God damn it! Really?
Yeah.
We're having some issues.
Yeah, and a mic is real bad right now too. It's
Is it
gotten worse.
mine?
Yeah, it's gotten worse. Jiggle
What?
something.
I've
Or
been
unplug.
jiggling.
Did you try unplugging it and plugging it back in? Sorry. That sounds good. Sorry to
Sounds
drop
good.
off. My internet totally cut out.
Is my mic like?
Oh, you sound
It's good
beautiful.
now. Yeah, no problem.
And we have lost pace.
We traded.
Yeah.
All right, you guys want to just continue?
Yeah, somebody loop me in. Put me in, coach.
I believe over the course of a lifetime, right, kind of what our mantra is at Compass, everybody has a story. Either yourself has experienced some mental health suffering, or someone in your family has experienced it, or a circle of friends. Everybody's touched by this, directly or indirectly. Now, this happens over the course of our lives, right? We get traumatized by events. We're stuck in a situation of learned helplessness. There's a situation we can't free ourselves from. And so we will always go through these waves. Now, that's where psychedelics could be very useful, right? Especially in times of turbulent change. And the question is, eventually, could these treatments be given preventatively? That we don't have to wait for someone to end up in a severe mental health crisis, right? Is there a way that these substances could actually be seen as more of a mental health vaccine? The only place to go there is through research and answering these questions. Otherwise, the regulators will not entertain that thought.
You guys got anything to comment on that? Want to keep going?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the necessity of clinics and churches. And I think we're only at the beginning of the, right now, because of medicalization, psychiatry and the regulatory bodies have the say over access in terms of someone gets psychedelics because they're sick. Now, I think that's by itself an issue. I think sometimes they're rightly placed to do that. But I think, like we were talking about with the crisis of meaning, what if someone's rabbi says, what's really wrong with them is that they're in a deep space of mistrust with God, and they need a psilocybin session that we do in our way to reconnect them to that. Is it your intention not to go after, say, USONA or other companies?
Do you want to before we get into this, do you want to pause on the
kind of,
previous
do you want that kind
point?
of ecosystem?
Yeah, sorry.
So, yeah, I mean, I the interesting thing about advocating for both, what was it, clinics and churches, is that
yeah.
And perhaps unsurprisingly, coming from the co-founder of an organization whose logo is literally a pyramid, but in both contexts, we're talking about hierarchical structures and organizations. And I think, if people feel invested in their clinics and churches and all of that, that's fine. But when we're talking about psychedelics and the notion of unmediated connection to the divine, or however we want to frame that, right? Nobody can get between you and your neurotransmitters. So at the end of the day, I think working for more sort of anarchic structures and trying to figure out how we can empower each other to make meaning and work together and engage around these things is far more interesting to me than advocating for, use or engagement through hierarchical structures or social engagements, arrangements personally. And again, not to say, like, to me, it also feels like there's a little bit of prohibition light logic imbued in that, like, people should, like prohibition wasn't enacted through any sort of scientific evidence or basis. No. And so, like, people should be free to use these compounds however they want in whatever context they want. End of story, full stop.
I just think it's idea of wanting to psychedelics into some kind of like formal spiritual structure or something. But, as somebody who was raised secular and found spirituality of these institutions, I've never had a guide or a guru. Where does that fit in? Is in this model.
Totally.
We do in our way to reconnect them to that.
Shall we go back in? There we go.
Is it your intention not to go after, say, Usona or other companies for their patents? Is it kind of, do you want that kind of ecosystem, or I would love to just hear from you what the intention is.
No, I mean, look, we would absolutely enforce our IP, right? I mean, otherwise we wouldn't file for IP. So I think that's really important. I've always said that, and again, right? I think that's.
That flag we planted earlier.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Paying attention.
We're not going to talk about any active litigation. We're never going to go after any researcher, clinic provider, etc. If somebody is infringing on our concrete IP. Eventually, this could lead to a case of litigation, but I don't have a crystal ball and I can't answer what the future will look like.
I'll just reiterate that I think a healthy ecosystem with a multidisciplinary approach, where very actually similar to something like the American Constitution, where you create something anti-fragile, i.e. resilient from the outset, so that there's many different approaches, and that for me is where innovation happens. It's multiple different perspectives happening at the same time that are free to do that and don't have regulatory hurdles or other professional hurdles to overcome. And I think the big question that none of us have solved yet is how to take the best of the medical model, which is regulation, and making sure that people, if you're a bad doctor, you're a bad psychologist, there are consequences for that. If you're a bad underground healer, you don't really have consequences for that. Maybe eventually you get called out, but there's a lot of harm in the underground as well. There's a lot of harm in the medical system too. Iatrogenic illness, so illness that's caused by medicine is a significant problem. But overall, I wouldn't go for surgery just like in a back alley with some guy with a scalpel, because I'm like, well, that's crazy. So I think figuring out, as we have clinics, churches.
Wait, stop real quick here. I just want to point out that that Rebel Wisdom was founded, in part, mostly, to make documentaries. Jordan Peterson has come out and said that that medicine might be doing more harm. Can people hear me?
I can hear you.
You're coming in and out. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll leave the point. Why don't we just go back into it?
Other iteration of places people go for healing or growth, that we have some I was going to say ethics pledge, but it's more than that.
But I thought about the ethics pledge.
It has to have consequences to it. It has to be some sense of regulation.
I just thought about it. Didn't work.
Regulates it.
I mean, I 100% agree with that.
So
ethics pledge.
It seems like he's talking out of both sides of his mouth there, right? Like we need to get rid of regulation, but we need to have the best of medicalization, which is the regulation. We need something like an ethics pledge, but not actually an ethics pledge. We need I'm kind of I mean, and just the opening of that about the anti-fragile. So now we're in the Schmachtenberger, Jamie Wheel, making up sort of modalities and using the most flowery language as possible. Sorry, what was that, Pace?
The author of the book attributed to this whole anti-fragile language.
Gotcha. Well, so I'm not sure, like, the notion that the Constitution, the American Constitution, is somehow an anti-fragile document that will apply to psychedelic dissemination. Like, I have to be honest, like, I'm not very clear as far as what he's trying to drive at with that. Like, what sort of landscape does he see the American Constitution painting for the future of psychedelic administration?
Yeah, I don't understand the Constitution talking about that. I think the point he's making, or what I hear, is sort of like a diversity of tactics, a diversity of approaches. Take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, make it sort of
like a mishmash.
Yeah, and sort of more resilient as a result of that. And I don't know, that's what I get out of it.
He gave sort of a yes and argument, like if I go to for a surgery, I want to make sure that it's but sometimes abuses happen in the underground, and he's not wrong about that. How if we decriminalize psychedelics, could certainly prosecution and cultural models that aren't currently possible could grow up and become the foundation for a legal structure. If that's we're hopefully moving towards things that are mostly culturally mediated, but basically, the idea of medicalization being the only route, the way that we've thought about things in a yes and, because I think we're yes and, if you want to see a doctor on psychedelics, cool, is that decriminalization should come first, because these are substances that have been decriminalized for political reasons, not medical. They've been criminalized for political reasons, not medical reasons.
Yeah, and I think too, like, if you want something that's somehow resilient or anti-fragile or capable, like nothing lasts. I could be an asshole and say, but nothing is lost. But
you've been listening. What have you been listening to?
But seriously, like the notion. So we're back to what Nishay has underlined, underscored, emphasized. Like this notion of these folks who want to build the scaled golem, who want to create this system that can be implemented, repeated, and established in a way that, like, ooh, this is going to stand the test of time, rather than acknowledging, and that's going to encompass and sort of provide a working framework for everything. And I think that at the end of the day, like, I'm less interested in that than the notion of sort of smaller scale, local, more grassroots engagement that fits the needs of the people who are who maybe share interest, affinity, some sort of community. And I want to be clear, like, I don't think by and large most of us have like real meaningful community in our lives, particularly as far as like our geographical realities. Like most of us live in atomized context, divorced from some of the people that we might have the most deep or intimate relationships with. And so like when we're looking at ways to move forward, I think seeing sort of a federation of much smaller ideas and strategies and approaches where people get to try to engage with their needs in daily life as the people best suited for doing that makes a hell of a lot more sense than trying to come up with some, singular plan that's going to last for however long. Shall we?
From therapists that have been involved in some of the
You guys don't see that?
No, it's going. It got turned off after it started.
Let me get back to his point here.
Sorry, yeah, we seem to be having some ongoing issues.
Yeah, like I was going to say ethics pledge, but it's more than that because it has to have teeth. It has to have consequences to it. It has to be some sense of regulation. But then the question is who regulates it?
I mean, I 100% agree with you, Alexander. I think this is, I've been shocked, quite frankly, with some of the stories I heard from the underground, but also from therapists that have been involved in some of the clinical trials with MDMA, of what has happened in terms of abuse and mischief making with patients. I think that's horrible. If you think about people that, some of these patients are so depressed, they're close to suicidal ideation, right? And they're in such a fragile state. They need to be protected at all costs. But that's where I say, that's why we're doing what we're doing. That's where regulation comes in, right? A good example is we're video recording, audio recording every session for the benefit of the patient, so they know exactly, even if they have been completely dissociated during the experience or whatever happened to them, that they will be able to see what the conduct of the therapist in the session has been, for example. And so I think this is crucially important. And I think that is one thing when we think about the overall movement, right, where this could be shut down, right? A couple of things that go wrong in terms of abuse or people doing stupid things on psychedelics. Thousands of people are doing stupid things on alcohol every weekend, right? And nobody cares. But the spotlight will be on psychedelics. And I think that's something that we as an overall field need to be very careful with, to do anything in our power to prevent any of that from happening. I think MAPS is doing some amazing work at the moment in educating law enforcement in states that are decriminalizing how to deal with people that are freaking out during a psychedelic experience and how to calm them down, etc. Those are great initiatives.
That was like watching like a runner, like a really good runner. He's like running really well, like winning. And then he's like right at the finish line and he just falls. And he kind of trips and smacks his face on the ground. I mean, he made a lot of good points. I agree. I was like, agree. Oh, no.
Say more about that.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, I got to watch it again. But, I mean, the stuff on Maps, like he's talking, I read it as that he's the actual therapist abuse that's like horrible in MDMA. I'm reading that he's talking about Richard Jensen and Donna Dreyer in the BC study. That's what he's talking about there.
Yep.
If you want to read more, read Olivia Goldhill's piece in Quartz. Psychedelic therapy has a sexual abuse problem. And then sort of at the end, he says, the great things. I don't know.
I mean, I'd also point out that and we haven't talked about this in a while, but the lightning in a bottle case, right, where the Zendo, somebody died at the Zendo tent, and
that's still ongoing too.
Yeah, and there's
ongoing litigation.
It was ongoing as of like a month or two ago.
Yeah, and looking at what went down there and some of the responses from the people involved about, what should we have done or how should we have handled it differently, it seems to me that perhaps MAPS is actually not the best equipped organization to be training people how to respond to some of these issues. I mean, as decrim and the potential for whatever sort of legalization or other relaxed legal environments becomes more and more prevalent, there's obviously a need to engage in education, and we've talked both as far as like psychedelic decrim, but also with drug decrim more generally, the need for education, and I think far more far-reaching projects and initiatives than the type that MAPS is equipped or capable of providing. I mean, that could be its own episode, just maybe as far as like dealing with what that could and should potentially look like. But
I want to rewind this just for like 10 seconds or so because I lost my point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and the law enforcement point.
Did you?
It was just a law enforcement point.
Okay. So, do you want to bring the video back onto. It's not on main. Nobody
I'm
else
just
saw
sitting
that.
here
If you
by
were,
my,
you're just,
I'm just sitting here by
watching it
myself
yourself.
watching that, and you guys don't say anything.
Well, here I'll throw. Well, I was grabbing the Quartz article, so I'm throwing the Quartz article in the chat for folks.
It's already there. It's already there, dude.
Oh, sorry.
Paste is on that.
Where? It didn't show up on.
He web archived it. All right, I'm going to continue this. Good?
Let's go.
Yeah, we're at the end, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, we are.
You know, we're very much in favor of decriminalization, 100%.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, I've got lots of comments on that, but I made most of them earlier when I pointed out how this is supposed to be a debate, and there's an article by a prominent actor, field of psychedelics, David Bronner, literally sounded the alarm not that many ago, describing how George Goldsmith was intervening against Measure 1, which is the psychedelic therapy bill that passed.
I like that. I like that screenshot.
To say that Compass is not like, you know, at all against psychedelic
Decrim
in a decriminalized fashion, like it was unchallenged.
I think this is one of the points. It's look at what they do, not what they say. All the companies they learned. Yeah. I think my opinion is when J.R. Ron from MindMed, who's as of yesterday not with MindMed
the former.
But I think that whether I don't know. This is my thought that they learned from his mistake that don't come out and smash decrim, and especially don't go out in the media, like someone like Forbes, and say, I want nothing to do with those decrim folks. Bad luck. Not good. So they're all going to say they're for decrim, I think. But I think it's worth seeing what they do and not what they say.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, but these kinds of oversights, like, we're not just like being mean. Like, this is there's a lot of omissions, both critically and factually, we felt the need to address.
Yep.
All right.
Sense is that there is a new form of being able to bring psychedelics into the mainstream, which accounts for all this complexity and never boils it down into one way of knowing. Because really, this is a question of power. It's a question of who is in control of access, who has the decision over access. And I think that that's why, for me, an ecosystem where power is dispersed evenly, like the U.S. Constitution.
I gotta pause it. I think that's a big assumption that he's making right there. I don't. Even if Compass or these other companies have too much power, I don't think that they control power over access. I just don't see that.
I will say, though, had this discussion started with a statement like that from Alexander or Ali, like discussion, like we're at the end, the clock is running out, and we've just brought.
Yeah, and also, like, if he's looking for a more distributed, like, again, this seems to, like, a good critique around that would sort of require an anti-capitalist perspective, you know, looking at the realities of how capitalism structures power.
What if it's a maybe capitalist critique or a kinda Sorry, I don't know.
Oh, you mean like a woke capitalist critique?
Like a sorta capitalist critique?
I think, just like listening to this, and it sounds like, because he just said U.S. Constitution again, it sounds like he's going to say that the U.S. Constitution somehow, like, broadly distributed powers. But if memory serves, like, the U.S. Constitution sort of only allowed political participation from a very small populace. And in fact, the founding fathers, I think it was Madison, who said that it should be constructed, society should be constructed so as to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority.
Against the tyranny of the majority.
If they didn't do that, there would be clear demands and pressure for agrarian reform. So I think he's mistaken if he's about to advocate for the U.S. Constitution in this context.
Come on, can we talk about the fact that in the U.S. Constitution, Black people are 3/5? 3/5.
Yeah. Can we talk about the fact that the
of a person.
That's how we still have slavery.
Yeah. Go on back.
Impression they had. How do you prevent bad actors? How do you create a system where power can't accumulate too much in one area? And it just about worked, even with Trump. I mean, it almost broke, but sort of just about worked. So astonishing things can happen when we all sit down and figure out how do we really want this to roll out. And that's where my concern with the speed at which everything is happening comes from, because I think there's just so much we don't know.
I also just want to point out that the whole point of the U.S. Constitution is to vest the power in the state, right? Like it's to create a new state and come up with the governing rules, right? So like the notion that somehow this is about distributed power just seems kind of nonsensical.
Well, I also want to point out that Ali started this conversation, and we'll post a link in the description to the entire, if we haven't already, debate. Ali starts this conversation with "we don't know" and ends it with "we don't know," which, I mean, kudos to the humility. But I mean, there is a lot that we do know about capitalism and about psychedelics, and much of that was absent from this conversation. It needs to be pointed out.
All right, this is the last point, I believe.
The promise of psychedelics and the way they change how we see ourselves and the world spreads through culture. I think that's the real promise of them. And you know, I'm not a fan of the word well-being so much because I don't know what we're being well for. I'm not sure this is a culture worth being well for right now. But I think psychedelics give us the creativity, the insight, the energy, the rebellious attitude, and the magic to figure out what that is. And I think that's where we're at, realistically, is figuring out who are we, where are we going, why are we so sick? And that's what I want psychedelics to do. Not to do, I mean, to inspire us towards is probably a better way to say it. And and together with that is a sense of a kind of psychedelic approach to how they're mainstreamed and this kind of multiplicity and complexity to it. So that's what my kind of deepest hope is for the space.
Deep hopes.
So yeah, just
not a lot of concrete proposals. Nishay.
Well, just final points that, I mean, we, just to reiterate, we feel like positive sounding platitudes isn't going to be enough, that we need to look at the evidence of how these dynamics have played out historically in order to evaluate how they're likely to play out in the future, and not just trust that good intentions and saying the right buzzwords is going to be enough to undo, centuries of systemic inequality and oppression.
Yeah, the notion that somehow mainstreaming can address the fallout of the mainstream, right? The fallout of dominant culture, that somehow mainstreaming psychedelics will engage with, the culture that it's not worth being well for. I mean, hell, like the notion that like psychedelics, like, yeah, sure, culture can facilitate the transmission of psychedelic ideas or insights, but at the end of the day, like I said earlier, no one can come between you and your neurotransmitters. Like psychedelics are ultimately the things that are capable of facilitating or catalyzing some of these experiences, and making meaning of that and working with those insights is ultimately like, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's an individual sort of, I don't want to say responsibility, but like it's an individual undertaking based on those experiences. Yeah. And to then bring that into community with other people to have the discussions about, well, here's what I encountered. Here are my thoughts. Let's take this back and forth and see what comes out of it. Okay. Like by all means, like that could be a role for culture.
I would just say with all of this big thinking, the meta crisis and the meaning crisis, the rebelliousness, the multiplicity, we're still talking about like laboring under the yoke of profit extraction at the end of the day, and that's really the big disappointment. From a discussion like this, from two individuals who fundamentally agree on some of the biggest points that could be debated in a conversation about capitalism and psychedelics. And so, ultimately, we're here to provide counter narratives. And we're hoping to do so, from a rigorous perspective. The things that we're drawing upon are, from the scholarship and the struggles of people who, they're real, they're out there in the world. And the reason why they're not being featured is part of the critique of capitalism, where certain voices are welcome at the table of the elite, left proverbially and literally out in the cold.
All right.
But thanks to...
I just pulled my headphones out.
I just wanted to say
ridiculous.
Thanks to everyone for joining us. I really appreciated all the thoughtful comments, and just want to say if you're kind of interested in these topics and, kind of robust anti-capitalist critique of psychedelic medicalization, mainstreaming, definitely, follow Psymposia. You can like our YouTube channel, we have Twitter, mailing list, website, those things. And we publish written content. It's sort of our bread and butter. We're more new to the video domain, but yeah, we're hoping to connect with like-minded folks and continue these conversations.
Yeah, if you want to support us, go to our Patreon. That's definitely the best way. And reach out to us too.
And there's a comment about Discord. So
make a Discord. Yes, it's been on.
It's on the list. We have it. It's there from before, but in the before times. But we have to kind of launch it. So stay tuned for kind of that. But
it'll be here soon. It's on the list.
And we will be here now. Sorry.
What did you say, Pace?
Oh my God. Will we?
Okay. God.
You kind of have to know what
it doesn't come
is.
through. It doesn't. Yeah.
I'm a new father. I have to
now.
do the dad jokes. So,
I don't even think that was a dad joke. I think that was actually quite clever.
In any case,
I also just want to point out as we're on the way out from Balam. Oops. I just wanted to point out. Yeah, sorry. Balam Seer just pointed out that banker Gordon Wasson discovers mushrooms. This has been a long road. Capitalism was likely the core of what he intended with mush. And, I think, like we've seen what capitalism has done. We saw what happened in Huatla de Jimenez with the hippie mushroom hunters. We've seen and are continuing to see what's going on with ayahuasca and other drug and shamanic tourism. And I think as Pace and the rest of us have pointed out, like, we don't need to speculate. There's plenty we don't know, but there's plenty we do know. And I really appreciate like how active and lively the chat has been, because we've been looking to find other folks who do know and are interested in talking about that. So thanks, y'all.
Yeah,
totally.
I think that's a good spot.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
All right,
cool. We'll see y'all next time.
Catch you next time.
See y'all on the next one.
Bye.
All right, so long.